7 o'clock, and I will call our regular town board meeting to order. First item of business this evening is roll call. Ms. Iker.
Mayor Christy Melendez.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Miles Baker.
Here.
Cindy Showerman.
Here.
Ken Bennett.
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer.
Here.
Ivan Adams.
Here.
Ms. Sharman, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 3 this evening is a proclamation for Small Business Saturday. Whereas the government of Windsor, Colorado celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community. According to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 28.8 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of all businesses with employees in the United States, are responsible for 63% of net new jobs created over the past 20 years, and whereas small businesses employ 48% of the employees in the private sector in the United States, and whereas on average 33% of consumers' holiday shopping will be done at small, independently owned retailers and restaurants, and whereas 91% of all consumers believe that supporting small, independently owned restaurants and bars is important. And whereas 76% of all consumers plan to go to one or more small business as part of their holiday shopping. And whereas Windsor, Colorado supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our neighborhoods. And whereas Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday, 15th day of November 2017. Item number 5, review of agenda by the board and addition of items of new business to the agenda for consideration by the board. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the agenda as presented tonight.
Second.
A motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer and a second from Mr. Bennett approving the agenda as presented this evening. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Okay. All in favor of approving the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved as presented.
May I interrupt for just a moment and suggest that you take something out of order? We will need a motion to take it out of order, but I wanted to let you know that the Director of Planning has received an email in which the applicant on item C5 and C6, which is a rezoning application in the Eagle Crossing and Fossil Ridge subdivisions, has requested that the matter be postponed to a date certain, that being November 27th of this month. So if you wouldn't mind taking that matter out of order just to consider the postponement, that might be helpful so all these folks who are here tonight don't have to wait until we get to the 5th and 6th items on the agenda.
Okay. Is there a motion on the floor to take those items out of order?
I have a question.
Mr.
Should
Baker?
I wait till we move it and then ask my question? Or
Does it pertain to taking it out of order or to postponing it?
postponing it?
Let's await. Let's take it out of order first, and then we'll talk about postponing it.
Okay.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion that we take items C5 and C6 out of order and move them to the top of the action agenda.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer to take items 5C and 5.6 and move.
C5.
C5 and
C6.
C5 and C6 and move them to the top of the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, they will be moved. So do we move forward with the rest of the agenda till we get to that item, or do we discuss those items now?
No, I think the idea is to entertain a motion to postpone to a date certain, that being November 27th.
Decorum,
Trying to hear.
there needs to
So
be
that-
decorum.
If the applicant is not prepared to go forward tonight, then you would take up the request for the postponement. You don't have to grant the postponement, but you should at least consider the postponement as a matter of procedure tonight.
Okay.
Should we-
So Mr. Baker?
Yeah, will we hear from the applicant tonight about the postponement, or is it?
I believe representatives of the applicant are present. Mr. Siegel is here in case there are questions.
So my other question is, that means we still can't talk about it because it's a quasi judicial,
That's correct.
and then that's a Thanksgiving weekend.
That's the Monday, 2 weeks from tonight.
So that's after Thanksgiving. I'm just concerned that all these people have shown up to speak.
Okay. So there is, have you made so we're seeking to see from the board, is there a motion for postponement?
I'll make the motion that we postpone item C5, C6.
We cannot have this, we cannot have you talking out of order because we need to, there will be an opportunity. Mr. Bennett, please proceed.
I'll make a motion that we postpone items C5 and C6. Do we need to establish a date?
Yes,
The request was November 27th.
correct.
Okay, till November 27th.
So postponing to a date certain on November 27th. Is there a second?
I have a question. and that-
What? Okay.
Well, is there a way to open public comment and receive comment tonight, and then they don't have to come back?
You could take up the public hearing and take evidence on the question and then postpone action on it to the 27th. I don't recommend it, but you could do that.
Why not?
There's always a risk that between the public hearing, during which all the evidence is to be presented, and the decision, that something could happen in between, and so you want them lined up back to back, if at all possible.
So could we hear from the applicant on the reasoning, or?
Yes, as long as there's a motion that is on the table.
Yeah, so
Where-
do I have to take a second though first? I need to take a
Yes.
second
Oh,
and then
sorry.
we can
Go
go
ahead and
into
talk about
discussion, Mr. Baker.
Sorry.
So I have a motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett to postpone items to a date certain for November 27th. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. So now we can have questions or before I take the vote.
So perhaps we can have a representative of the applicant explain why the request for continuance has been tendered, and also perhaps have some support from staff on why it might be best to have that done as a procedural matter with notice to the community.
Madam Mayor, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Mr. McCarter, is it within my rights to ask, could you explain the applicant's rights to do this? I mean, we haven't really talked about it. We haven't had that happen very often. But could you explain the applicant's rights to postpone?
I don't know that there's a right to postponement. There's certainly a right to request postponement.
That's what I mean.
It happens from time to time, either because the applicant is not prepared to proceed or because the applicant has another opportunity that they want to explore before pursuing the land use question. My understanding is the reason behind this is it's the latter, but I don't want to speak for the applicant.
And one more part of that. If there hadn't been a second, what would have happened to that motion?
We probably would have returned items C5 and C6 to where they belong in the agenda and proceeded with the agenda in sequence.
Okay, so we do have a question on the floor from Mr. Baker, who asked the question, and was looking for the applicant to speak with regards to this. So if you would come forward, please.
Yes, it's as Mr. MacArthur's.
Can you please identify yourself for the
Sorry.
record? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no
The
problem.
address.
Tom Siegel, Water Valley, 1625 Pelican Lakes, Windsor. Okay. Late Thursday afternoon, we had an inquiry regarding Fossil Ridge community development, and we wanted to learn more about that, so that's why we're asking for the continuance.
Mr. Baker, did you have anything else?
Is it safe to assume that this item that you're exploring could materially impact the
Yeah.
current application?
We wouldn't have asked for the continuance unless
Okay.
there was this potential.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Is there anything else we need to entertain?
There is one item. If we convene if we take it up tonight the way we are, then the public is on notice if we continue it to a date certain when to return to for the public hearing. If we continue it indefinitely, if we indicate it's continued but there's no specific date that we'll be back, that leaves the question open as to when the public hearing will happen. We would have to issue new notice and start over when it comes to notifying the public. So the idea is to make the notification to the public happen tonight if ultimately you approve the continuance.
Okay. And that date is November 27th.
That's the way the motion reads.
And quite frankly, Madam Mayor, that's the date we requested. We think we'll have an understanding relatively quickly.
Okay. Is there anything else? Any other questions? So we do have a motion on the floor. We don't take public comment during this time, would we?
You could, but I would recommend it be limited.
But the public comment, we would advise you that if it's with regards to the development, we'd have to disregard it, would we not? We cannot take that into account when we come back on the 27th. So any comment that you make in this matter this evening, we would have to disregard until the 27th.
Except as it relates to the postponement.
Yes.
That's the question that's before you right now.
Okay. Okay. So I will allow public comment with relationship to the postponement this evening. Those who'd like to come forward one at a time. State your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Hardy Masudi, 7004 Redosa Drive, Windsor, Colorado. My question to the forum is, how many times can the applicant ask for postponement? This is their second time, to the best of my knowledge. Who can answer that question? Can I ask that from the town attorney? Can you address that, please?
So Madam Mayor, this is a separate application than the one that was withdrawn. There was a rezoning application for this vicinity. That application was withdrawn, and a new application was tendered for this project. So this is the first time this project has been, a postponement has been requested.
Noted, thank you.
So, but how many times? Can they do it indefinitely?
They could.
Make a request.
Okay.
Give my voice, I've got laryngitis. Todd Gages, 7039 Redosa Drive.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
Sure. So this is the second continuance, regardless of what. It may be a different reason, but it's the same project. And to make a continuance on a holiday weekend or right after a holiday weekend puts extra stress on the folks here that want to give their opinion and tell you how much they're against this project. So this is the second time you've had a huge group of folks that have come here to express their opinion, and because of a little ploy by Mr. Lind, we're not able to do it. So this is ridiculous, and I would strongly suggest that you vote against this.
I would ask that you refrain from making any kind of outward bursts or comments. This is still a room that deserves respect. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colin Sanders, 7035 Ruidoso Drive. I would respectfully request you deny postponement and that this is heard tonight for the other reasons stated. And one of the biggest things I would tell you why we should not postpone it any longer is your own code. Take a look at 16660. This matter should not even be in front of this board at all because of that code. And I would just ask you to do that and respectfully request you do not deny postponement. Additionally, the motion that previously passed was to go ahead and move this issue up and not make all these people wait until it was on the regular part of the agenda. That motion was approved, and this motion should be the first thing heard this evening. Thank you.
Any other comments, public comments related to the postponement?
Mike Kimmick, 7044 Ruidoso Drive, Windsor, Colorado. A question, so they have selected a date of November 27th. Can you propose an alternative date versus, say, maybe in January when we're done with the holidays and people are here? I guess that's a question for the town attorney.
The motion before you is to continue it to the 27th of November. If that motion fails, I suppose another motion could be tendered to put it to some other date.
Thank you.
Ms. Sharman, you had a question?
Mr. McCarter, what are the options for people who want to provide input for a public hearing that are unable to attend on that date?
What I haven't heard is anyone saying they can't attend, but those who can't attend could do what the gentleman did just a moment ago and present their comments in writing, and that could be put into the record, accepted into the record, and serve as evidence upon which you could make your decision.
Any additional comments from the public?
Can I just ask where we would send that?
Madam Mayor, if folks want to provide information for the record, if this matter is postponed, it could be provided to the Director of Planning here at Town Hall, 301 Walnut, Windsor 80550.
Can you provide probably an email too? That might be easier for some folks to email rather than mail.
We'll have, you can get cards to folks if they do.
Okay.
It'll be Scott Ballstead, Planning Director.
Okay. Okay.
My name is Kim Davey. I live at 8795 Longs Peak Circle in Steeplechase. I encourage you to vote against this. As you are asking for our respect, I'm asking for yours, for all of us. We've been dancing this dance a long time. We've been to the Planning Commission twice, and regardless of the reason behind this, we've been here twice. And it just seems a little bit, for lack of a better word, manipulative on the developer's part to keep postponing this, perhaps in hopes that we will back down. I can assure you that we won't, because we're all passionate about it. So I would encourage you to vote no.
Good evening. And
Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, Gloria Belden, P.O. Box 3, 23 Windsor, Colorado. And I feel that the Windsor folks in every area needs to be notified about this. And I feel like the majority of the people here are needing postponement. And I am for the folks here of Windsor, fourth generation. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, are there any further questions from, oh, one final one?
All right. This is the first time I've ever even cared about what you guys did. Didn't really care before.
Please state your name and address
Certainly.
for the record.
My name is Christopher Fair. I live at 7038 Aladar Drive, Windsor, Colorado, directly affected by this particular action of changing everything. I'm just curious, what is our motive of appeal besides coming and talking to you guys? Because I feel, maybe the feeling is invalid, that this is going to go through no matter what we say or do. So what is our option for going to the next step and stopping you from doing this action? That's what I want to know. I want to know what I can do, and I want to know what my legal rights are. Because the truth is, not at all interested in this happening, none of my neighbors are. Now, as far as the postponement, absolutely, completely manipulative. And I think that everybody with eyes can see this, okay? He just wants us to go away quietly into the night. We're not going to do it. This isn't right, and we're not going to just vanish. So we want to know what's the next recourse. What do we do? There's an authority hired you guys, right?
This is the public process.
This is the public process. What do we do if this fails? Can we go to another level? Can we complain to somebody else?
Madam Mayor, let me suggest that the gentleman refer his questions to counsel of his own choosing. The question of the postponement doesn't speak to what happens if the rezoning is approved or disapproved. So I would recommend you not answer that and that you refer the gentleman to counsel of his own choosing.
Okay, so it's all right, that's fine. This is the people's government, not the lawyer's government.
Okay. Please keep your comments to the postponement.
My name is Junior Boyle. I live at 7402 Ladbrook Drive, Windsor, Colorado. My question is, or I guess what I'm asking is if we can postpone it, if they're going to postpone it, if we can do it till January and February. And my other question is, has anybody done a wildlife study of that area? Because I know there's bald eagles, all kinds of animals that live over there.
Okay.
Is there any kind of study?
This is regards to postponement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Pat Davey. I live at 8795 Longs Peak Circle. I would just want to address the council of, you're elected officials and you're supposed to be representing us, and we are here in numbers and we're postponing this for the second time because of one individual, because he didn't have his act together. Anyway, I just remind you that you're elected officials and you're supposed to be kind of representing us, not necessarily being a detriment to us here, okay? So please, don't allow him to postpone this.
For the record, Mr. McCarter, I do think we need to make clear this is not the second time on this particular zoning item. I know it feels the same, but it is a different zoning matter with regards this evening. State your name.
My name is Gary LeMay, 5514 Fairmount Drive. It's in the Meadows area, right across the street from the area we're talking about. Anyway, postponing. And yes, it is the second time. You may have reframed it in a different way, but it's the second time and that we've been here, and you know, it's disrupting our lives. And then you're proposing to put it on, you know, a holiday weekend. I mean, come on. You know, people are traveling, they're out visiting other parts of their families, and they're not around. I've got jury duty myself on that day. But anyway. If you're going to postpone it, don't pick that weekend. So.
Hi, my name's Chris Payne. I'm at 7039 Aladar Drive. I came down here a few weeks ago to get in front of I believe the building commission, and sat in this room that wasn't quite this full, but pretty close, and listened to 99% of the people in this room present to the building commission why we were against this project. And at the end of the night, the building commission basically said, and I'll quote as close as I can what the foreman said was, "We believe in Mr. Lind, and pretty much I believe that everything he does good to the community," which told me that they didn't listen to anything that was said. And I think that's the concern with the people in here tonight, is I don't know how you guys are gonna vote or what your actions will be, but what we saw the other night was really disturbing, that it wasn't something that was representing the people. It was very much a behind the scenes. And to come down here again and have it again changed to a date that is very obviously one that a lot of people may not be able to be here. I realize you can write a letter in, but a lot of times in a letter you can't debate or hear the other side to come back and forth. You can only just write a single opinion. So again, I think if anything comes out of this tonight, to pick a date that is fair for everyone to be able to come back down here and put an end to the, if we get a big group of people here again, let's make it clear we're not going to continue to just give them an out to help for a room that doesn't fill up like this with an opposition against them. So I would ask that you vote against this tonight, please.
Can I ask the applicant, Mr. Siegel, can you step forward again? Are you opposed to putting this to a date later than the date that is currently on the floor?
We're not opposed to that. The only reason why we picked that date, because, again, we wanted to move this forward. But if there's consensus that we'd like to change it to another date certain, we'd be amenable to that.
You're amenable to another date?
Yes.
Okay. Who made that last motion, Ken?
I did, yeah.
Could we look, to see if he would be in favor of changing his motion at this point, Mr. McCarter, or what would be?
My feeling is you've got a motion that it has been served up and has been seconded. You should take action on that motion, and if there is someone who wishes to make a follow-up motion that speaks to a different date, you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any final comments on the postponement issue from the public before I close that and take action with the board? Seeing none, we do have a, you've already spoken. Seeing none, we do have a motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Mr. Adams. Postponing item C5, C6 to a date certain, that being November 27th. Is the system up and running now? Okay. We will vote electronically then. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Okay, and the motion fails unanimously 5-1. The nays were Baker, Sharman, Bennett, Melendez, Adams, and the yeas were Rennemeyer.
Madam Mayor, I would
Yes.
like to make a motion to postpone items C5 and C6 to the December 11th meeting so that it is not falling on a holiday weekend adjournment.
Okay,
Second?
we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Sharman and a second from Mr. Bennett to postpone items C5 and C6 to a date certain, this time being December 11th. Any additional questions
Do you have public comment on this as well?
or comments? No. Okay,
I have one. I'm going to vote no on this, mostly because all these folks showed up to speak tonight, and also I might be traveling that week for work, so I'm not sure that will
Oh.
work. I'll try to change my schedule, but I'll do my best.
okay.
I'm just concerned if we try to match everyone's schedule, I think we'll get so far out.
Right, and I think we want to
We need
handle
some-
this
we need
sooner
some
rather than
certainty.
later, okay?
Yeah.
So we do have a motion on the floor.
I
Mr.
just want to
Bennett.
make a comment. I've sat through a couple of planning commission meetings, and I've seen many of you. I absolutely understand how it feels. I've been in the same situation, go to the meeting, and some's been canceled, postponed. I'm hopeful that maybe, we don't know what's coming, the changes, but I'm hoping that maybe there's something in there that's more amenable. But I just want to recognize that I do appreciate the frustration when you go to several meetings and it gets postponed.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Well, I would like to make a comment, and I think that when you think about parliamentary procedure, when you ask for an item to be on an agenda, you, I assume, come to the town manager or someone here at the staff and ask to have it be put on the agenda. And if something happens that I could not present the plan, it's my right to take it off. And I think we've done that before in other situations. That doesn't mean that I'm not in agreement with some of the things we heard, but I think looking at parliamentary procedure, a person has a right to put something on an agenda and take it off. And that's their right, just like it's your right, our right to be at this meeting tonight. But, you know, we do have rights in this country, and I'm thinking about parliamentary procedure, and I just think that, you know, that's probably why I seconded it in the first place. But by the same token, I understand that we've heard some people say that maybe we could change, you know, just change the date, not have it on the Thanksgiving weekend. All right, we just talked about that too. So anyway, that's all the comments that I want to make, but I want to make that comment. I think we need to think about, and I've studied government, and I know parliamentary procedure, and I think we ought to think about that too, and I think the folks in this audience maybe ought to think about it too.
And I also want to speak that we do understand that there's probably a certain high level of disappointment, but we have to protect the rights of all landowners. And in this situation, whatever the vote outcome is, and I can assure you this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and so at that time and date, when we do hear, we will hear everything and anything that the public or the applicant has to say, and we will make our case that evening based on solely on what we hear in that quasi-judicial process that night. That is the standard before us, and that is the governance that we have. So we do have a motion on the floor from Ms. Sharman and a second from Mr. Bennett, postponing item C5 and C6 to a date certain, that being December 11th. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the motion passes unanimously. I'm sorry, the motion passes 5-1. The yeas being Sharman, Bennett, Melendez, Renemeyer, Adams, and the nays being Mr. Baker. So thank you. Moving on then to item 5 is our board liaison reports. Mayor Pro Tem Baker. Should we wait a few minutes? Okay. Pro Tem Baker, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Advisory Board.
Thank you. I was unable to attend the last pre-cab meeting. It was a very light agenda. They had Jacoby Farm Master Plan update was presented. There's also a presentation on inclusive playgrounds. Is that the correct term? So I missed out on that, but I was able to attend the Larimer County Trails and Open Space Board meeting over in Loveland. We basically heard updates from each community on their projects for trails and open space. It was very interesting.
Okay. Town Board Member Sharman, Water and Sewer Board, Clearview Library Board.
The Water and Sewer Board has not met since my last report. The Library Board met at the end of October and reviewed and approved their budget. They were looking to potentially have a revised budget should the mill levy have passed. One of the things to note from their budget presentation was about the number of programs that they offer per capita, and it was interesting that the Clearview Library District offers about double what the state average is and about 50% more programs than what resort libraries offer on average.
Okay. Town Board Member Bennett, Planning Commission, Windsor Housing Authority.
At the last Planning Commission meeting, they conducted the public hearing on item 8 on tonight's agenda, dealing with the Great Western Second Annexation. And the Housing Authority has not met. They'll meet again next week.
Okay. Town Board Member Rennemeyer, Historic Preservation Commission, Great Western Trail Authority, and Chamber of Commerce.
The Historic Preservation Commission met for their once-a-month meeting last Wednesday night, where we talked about events in 2018, such as the Saving Places Conference put on down in Denver by the Colorado State Historic Preservation Office, as well as our 2018 annual event that the state encourages us to have for certified local governments. And we would like to start looking into having a historic church walking tour up and down Walnut Street in downtown. So that was kind of the gist of the Historic Preservation Commission from last week. The Chamber of Commerce met last Wednesday morning, action-packed day for me on that Wednesday. That meeting pretty much entailed the different events that the Chamber of Commerce is going to be doing for local businesses in 2018, as well as the chamber dinner that was a couple weeks ago, and what a success that they feel that was. I was not able to be there, so I'm going off of what everybody else has said about that. And so they are actually looking forward, I believe, at this point, to do the chamber annual chamber dinner at the same Red Barn location next year as well. So, and then the Great Western Trail Authority met on Thursday night last week, where we discussed the completion of the trail from Severance to Eaton. And one of the motions or resolutions that we're going to be taking up tonight has to do with money to be able to get that project over the finish line so that the Rails to Trails from Eaton to Windsor can be completed, and that missing segment can complete the path around Windsor, the system of paths around Windsor. So, you know, that's kind of a breakdown on the three different commissions from last week or this month.
Okay. Town Board Member Adams, Tree Board, Poudre River Trail Corridor Board.
The tree board meets on the fourth Tuesday of the month, so we have not met this month. And I gave a report about last month's. So the Poudre River Trail Board, I'm embarrassed to say that I was unable to go to the meeting. The only thing that I do know from that meeting is that they are still trying to find a manager, and they're setting up new interviews for that position, and I think it's needed badly right now. Thank you.
Okay. And I have Downtown Development Authority and the North Front Range MPO. North Front Range MPO did not meet this month in November. However, they will be meeting on November 7th. Downtown Development Authority, I don't have a new report since my last report. We are meeting this Wednesday. Yep, this Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. And they are preparing In accordance with Small Business Saturday, they have a promotion that will kick off on Saturday, November 25th. Spot an elf spot the DDA elf on a shelf. And we have 27 downtown Windsor businesses participating. If you go to the Windsor DDA website, you can get all the information to spot the elf and win a potential $100 gift certificate. So that's all I have to report this evening. Moving on to item 6. Item 6 is our public invited to be heard. This is for individuals wishing to participate in a public invited to be heard non-agenda item. You're requested to sign up or come before the podium when you are called upon. Give your name and address. I'm assuming all the folks who signed this evening have left because they all were here. The topic was zoning. But is there anybody else this evening who wished to come before the board on a non-agenda item? Okay.
Hi. I'm Alexia Thomas, 437 Bluegrass Court, Windsor. Tonight I wanted to talk about how to get an item tax exempt in front of the board. I am clearly a woman, and with being a woman, we deal with a biological process of menstrual cycles. And with that, I have experienced and talked to a lot of women that cannot afford many menstrual products because of the tax put on it by state and local taxes. So my question was, how do we go about getting something exempt from the local tax of 3.95 in Windsor?
Mr. Arnold.
So you could probably, we could talk about that in a work session. It would take an amendment to your code to exempt that specific definition of some product to allow that to occur at the local level.
Okay.
So if you'd like to spend some time on that work session, Mr. McCarger and Mr. Moyer will tell you what the code says, what it would mean, and how to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the board this evening on a non-agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on then to item B, the consent calendar. The consent calendar this evening has 6 items: minutes of the October 23rd, 2017 regular meeting and the October 24, 2017 special meeting, resolution number 2017-89, resolution supporting reauthorizing by the General Assembly of the Colorado Lottery Division in 2018. Item 3, resolution number 2017-90, a resolution approving and accepting a deed of dedication for right-of-way and easement rights from Imago Enterprises, Inc. for public use as a temporary and permanent right-of-way for storm drainage improvement pertaining to the Well County Road 13 erosion mitigation project. Item 4, resolution number 2017-91A, resolution approving a stipulation between the Town of Windsor and Front Range Energy with respect to a matter pending in the Well County District Court Water Division 1. Item 5, resolution number 2017-92, resolution approving the terms of representation between the Town of Windsor and Butler Snow LLP with respect to the refunding of bonded indebtedness associated with the Community Recreation Center expansion. And item 6, the report of bills for 2017.
Madam Mayor, I would move that we approve the consent calendar as printed.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Adams and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer approving the consent calendar as presented. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the consent calendar approves unanimously. Moving on to item C, board action. Our first item this evening is an outside agency funding request from the Girl Scouts of America with staff presentation from Eric Lucas. Mr. Lucas.
Mayor and Board, tonight you have before you a request from a local Girl Scout troop to waive or no, I'm not sorry, excuse me, to waive their fees and reimburse them for 12 rentals at the Recreation Center starting this week through, I believe it's May 3rd. So their troop leader is here tonight, Beth McGrew, to explain their request. But the short story of it is they are having to leave the high school due to construction, so they'd like to come to the Recreation Center for those 12 meetings. Our policy mirrors your policy in regards to town-sponsored events. So in order for us to have their fees reimbursed, they need to appear before you tonight and ask for reimbursement for $980 to allow them to have those 12 rentals. And then I believe after May, they'll be able to return to the school when that construction is complete. So with that, I'll ask applicant to come up and speak to you tonight. So.
Okay, thank you. Will the applicant please step forward, or the applicants?
Hi, I'm Beth McGrew. Do you need my address?
Yes, please, just for the record.
I'm a troop leader of juniors. We have 7 juniors who are age 10 and 11 here in Windsor. We've been a troop, actually most of the girls have been a troop since the very beginning, their first year of Daisies. And this is the first, ever since the beginning, we've had our meetings at the high school. This is Carol Ward. She's the co-leader, and she's also a teacher at Windsor High School. And it's through her classroom that we're using. I'm going to let you step up.
Unfortunately, my classroom no longer exists. It is an emergency exit. And so I am currently out in one of the mods, and because I'm in a mod, we don't have access to water or restrooms, which is something that we need for our meetings. And so we have no place this year. We've been kind of makeshifting it so far, but we really like to be able to use the rec center to have our meetings so the girls can keep going strong with earning their badges and doing their different projects that they're working on.
Okay.
Would you like to meet the girls?
Sure.
Okay. Why don't you step up and say your name?
One at a time.
Say your name into the, yes, into
the microphone.
My name is Violet McGrew.
That's good.
My name is Annabelle Benson. Okay, my name is Annabelle Benson. My name is Alexa Sugai. My name is Madigan Ward. My name is Bethany Middleton. My name is Jessica Cobb.
And we do have one more Girl Scout. She was unable to make it tonight. Her name is Kylie Lichtenberg.
Okay. Okay, any questions from the board? I too was a Girl Scout in Windsor. We met at the Methodist Church at the time. So I would move that we approve this because I believe in doing so that we are moving forward leaders of our future here.
Second.
I cannot make a motion.
I was shocked that you actually made a motion. I thought,
No, I was making a comment, but I cannot make a motion. So is there approval?
I move that we approve the funding request.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Mr. Baker approving the Girl Scout request this evening. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And it passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck, girls. Moving on to item 2, ordinance number 2017-1547, an ordinance annexing and zoning certain territory known as the Diamond Valley Annexation to the town of Windsor, Colorado. This will require a supermajority for adoption. It is second reading and legislative action. Mr. Balstead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Board. This is the second reading of the Diamond Valley Annexation Ordinance. It's been reviewed in accordance with Section 15.110 of the Municipal Code. The site's approximately 65 acres on the north side of Eastman Park Drive, about a mile east of State Highway 257 at the intersection with Howard Smith Drive. This is the annexation plat and its location, proximity to the park. The applicant, or there was a neighborhood meeting. There was one person show up for that neighborhood meeting, and all the notification has been done in accordance with the code and state statute. And staff is recommending approval of the ordinance on second reading. There is one change that was made since first reading, and that was the addition of a section 2, which identifies the zoning designation as heavy industrial. And that was just inadvertently left out of the first reading. So with the second reading, it is now proposing the heavy industrial zoning district. That's consistent with the agreement with the property owner. Staff requests that the following be entered into the record: the application and supplemental materials, the staff memo and supporting documents, all testimony presented that may be presented in the public during public comment, and the recommendation.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Balstead with regards to this? It is a second reading, so would we take any public comment with regards? Is there any public comment with regards to this ordinance? Okay. Seeing none and seeing no further questions from the board, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance number 2017-1547 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor from Ms. Sharman and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer approving ordinance number 2017-1547. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Moving on to item 3, resolution number 2017-93. A resolution approving an annexation agreement between the Town of Windsor and 7N LLC with respect to the Diamond Valley annexation to the Town of Windsor and authorizing the mayor to execute the same. Legislative action, Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a legislative act to approve an agreement that really was written into a pre-annexation agreement with this same landowner several years ago. So as we now have reached the point where we're annexing the property, the terms of that pre-annexation agreement have been swallowed up into this agreement. It is not at all unusual for us to have these agreements at the time of annexation to make certain that future development of the property is something that is predictable and reliable for both parties. I can tell you that the negotiations over this agreement took an awful long time with a lot of back and forth to make certain its terms were acceptable to both parties. It does carry forward the terms of the pre-annexation agreement, and I am recommending you approve it this evening.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. McCarter with regards to the resolution? Okay. Seeing none, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve resolution number 2017-93 as presented.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer approving resolution number 2017-93. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution carries unanimously. Moving on to item 4, resolution number 2017-94. A resolution approving and accepting a deed of dedication for right-of-way for roadway and related public transportation purposes with respect to the Diamond Valley annexation to the Town of Windsor, Colorado. Again, legislative action, Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is the tag-along to the last two items. Madam Clerk, would you mind displaying the map again that Mr. Balstead at least has up on this screen? There it is. In the lower left corner, you can see an intersection with Eastman Park Drive, and then there's a northbound line. The deed of dedication that is before you in this item gives the Town of Windsor the east half of a roadway segment that runs up from Eastman Park Drive north up into toward the top of the property. Not exactly sure how far it goes. It's a couple thousand feet. But regardless, it's the east half of the roadway. The expectation is that the annexing party will improve the intersection and create a temporary road into their property along that, the easement that they're granting here. And then when the property to the west develops, we'll get the other half of the roadway and actually build the permanent roadway. That road, if you see on the map, is called Diamond Way. So that's the roadway designation. We're asking that you accept the dedication of the right-of-way so that we can hold that and eventually get it built when the time comes.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. McCarter with regards to this resolution? Okay. Seeing none, I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 2017-94.
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rennemeyer and a second for Mr. Adams, approving resolution number 2017-94. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the resolution passes unanimously. Moving on to item 7, resolution number 2017-95. A resolution ratifying, approving, and confirming the terms and conditions of the amended master plan for Great Western 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Annexations Master Plan. Robert Eck, Roland Acquisitions the Second LLC, applicant Josh Rowland. LAI Design Group, the applicant's representative. This is quasi-judicial action. Mr. Hornbeck will give presentation. Mr. Bennett, did you need to?
I think it's the next one, number 8.
Next one? Okay.
I think so.
Okay, Mr. Hornbeck.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Board. This amended master plan has been reviewed in accordance with Article 2, Chapter 15 of the Municipal Code. The site is located east of State Highway 257 between Eastman Park Drive and Cooter Trail Drive. The adjacent uses and zone districts to the property are as follows. To the north are various businesses, zone general commercial and limited industrial. The former Kodak campus lies to the east of the property, is in unincorporated Weld County. To the south is a Town of Windsor owned property that's zoned recreation and open space. And to the west is Water Valley Village general commercial, as well as the single family homes zoned residential mixed use. The existing site zoning is a mix of residential mixed use, general commercial, and limited industrial. The purpose of this amended master plan is to modify the land uses that are depicted on the western portion of the master plan. The eastern portion of the master plan along Great Western Drive is not a part of this proposed amendment. The amendment would replace uses allowed under the residential mixed-use zone district as the primary land use with those allowed under the heavy industrial zone district. With the limited scope of residential uses proposed, the subject request, the park and school sites that were previously shown on the master plan have been eliminated. Also proposed as a means of giving the landowner greater flexibility for future development is the designation of certain parcels as either general commercial or multifamily, as well as other parcels as either general commercial or limited industrial. The master plan and associated planned unit development address the proximity of the proposed heavy industrial to multifamily uses, as well as to the State Highway 257 corridor by using limited industrial and or general commercial as a buffer to those heavier industrial uses. The master plan before you, Area H, Area I, Area K, are all areas proposed for the heavy industrial uses. This hatched area is kind of a transition with the next layer being the general commercial parts. So it feathers out from the heavier uses to.
Can you point out where the potential of multifamily could be?
It's this area E. So it's all adjacent to Highway 257.
Okay.
I believe is the primary one. And then the south side of the plan is similar to the above. And this portion to the south shows the future crossroads connection, and this being the property that was recently donated to the town of Windsor from the applicant. The, the proposed design standards in the commercial corridor plan are proposed to be adopted as a part of this, which wouldn't typically apply, and that is a part of the planned unit development, the next agenda item. The acreages devoted to the different uses are shown before you. Again, it's primarily going from largely residential to largely heavy industrial, with some other uses mixed in. There was a neighborhood meeting held, not with this item, which is not required, but with the PUD, which is the next agenda item. And there were 3 neighbors in attendance at that meeting, and those notes are included with the next agenda item. The application is consistent with the comprehensive plan, particularly Chapter 5B, the growth framework, the goal, as well as Objective 1. Chapter 5C, residential areas framework plan, the goal and Objective 4. At their October 18th, 2017 meeting, Planning Commission forwarded to Town Board a recommendation of approval of the amended master plan, subject to all outstanding Planning Commission and staff comments being addressed. Staff does request the following be entered into the record: application and supplemental materials, staff memo and supporting documents, all testimony received, as well as the recommendation. With that, that's all I have.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Hornbeck?
I have a question.
Mr. Baker.
From a planning perspective or land planning, is this a better transition from the heavy industrial versus just having the whole thing residential mixed use?
The previous plan did have some buffers where it wasn't necessarily heavy industrial right up to residential. So I wouldn't characterize it as better. They both have transitions. I think this is just changing the predominant land use.
What about the properties on the west side of 257? Is this better for them or worse? Or does it matter?
It would put industrial in closer proximity to that area. Part of the reason for the PUD, the next agenda item, is to allow for different transitional standards where there's more restrictions in this limited industrial area in terms of outdoor storage and building height before it transitions to the heavy industrial.
So the PUD allows for different transitions than our regular code?
It proposes more restrictive.
More restrictive.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Adams.
Paul, from the reading the packet, it looked like they eliminated any school site or any park site. Can you talk a little bit about what the reasoning was behind that?
Sure. So the proposed, if you look at the proposed acreage of residential mixed use was around almost 390 acres previously. It's being reduced to a maximum of around 37 acres. So the number of units would be way down. This was referred to the school district, and they were not opposed to eliminating the school site. Similar to the park site, without many residents in the area, it didn't make sense to have a park in this location.
And that was discussed with our Parks and Recreation Department?
It was sent to.
I assumed it was, but I just wanted to ask if that was the reason, because I remember the conversation about the residential use earlier when they requested it, but, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? In the packet, it referred to item 2C, C2 and C3 with regards to the community meeting, and you had 3 attendees. I failed to find that this evening. Can you just tell me what the gist of the concerns were in that neighborhood meeting?
So I believe it should have been items C8 and C9.
Oh, okay.
The meeting was about 2 years ago. My recollection is there weren't necessarily opposition, it was more to find out what was going on.
Mr. Redemeyer.
Mr. Hornbeck, looking at this, I see 2006 master plan on one side and I see proposed amendment on the other side. Are those columns supposed to equal the same amount of acreage?
They could be different.
They're significantly different.
Right.
So I just was curious how we went from over 700 acres worth of master plan in 2006 to 500.
I believe a big part of that is the part that was donated to the town, which is to the south.
Is that
so that's
200 acres worth or something?
That's been removed. I'm not sure the acreage of that.
Mr. Rennemeyer, it's about 150 acres, that donation parcel that we received about a year ago.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional questions concerning this resolution? Okay. If not, I would seek Mr. McCarter.
Perhaps the applicant can step forward and at least reaffirm the information you've received from Mr. Hornbeck, but also add anything or answer any questions you may have directly of the applicant. And I know there are applicant representatives. Mr. Eck.
Good evening, Mayor, Board. My name is Bob Eck. Address is 2055 Howard Smith Avenue East, Windsor 80550. Eric Halverson is also with me tonight. And I think to Mr. McCarter's point, Paul did a nice job of kind of summarizing what the application is all about. I would make a couple of comments as it relates to the acreage. It's a very observant comment there. 150 acres roughly was donated to the town. And then in that table, there are a couple of entries, one being the school site and one being the park, that both of those acreages are actually part of the residential mixed-use acreage as well, so it doesn't foot at the bottom to your observation. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you for addressing that.
We're here to answer any questions that you may have. So.
Are there any specific questions for the applicant? Do you have any current heavy industrial uses in mind for this potential piece of property?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Eric Halverson, again, 2055 Howard Smith Avenue East. We are working with a couple of prospects right now that are more R&D campus-oriented type prospects, still under code names, so not very far in that negotiation really at all. But we see it as more of a campus type scenario, R&D, lighter manufacturing, that sort of thing on the west end here.
It'll differentiate itself nicely with the more heavy industrial, rail-served heavy industrial that's to the east. So, and one other comment, if I may, just for clarification too, and that is on the second page of the southern half, you asked about multifamily, and Paul pointed out Area E, which is on the map currently in front of you, and then just to the south of that, you see Area O, which is open space. But there's a small 10-acre parcel along Highway 257 that also has the possibility of being multifamily. It's designated as multifamily. So I just wanted to, thanks. I don't know how to drive these things. So it's Area G, if my eyes serve me correctly. Well, it's right here, I guess. There you go. Area G. So it's another 8.8 acres that does have the designation for multifamily.
Okay. And then the commercial corridor is up there in that top left corner, correct?
Correct. And that really hasn't changed from the previous zoning. I think the acreages have changed a little bit, the configuration, but basically it's still general commercial along the hard corner of Eastman Park and 257, just like it was in the previous plan. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any additional questions? Okay, Mr. McCarter, do we need anything else?
I don't believe so, Madam Mayor. I think the record is complete.
Okay, and I would seek a motion.
I move to approve resolution number 2017-95 as presented.
Second.
The motion on the floor for Ms. Sharman and a second for Mr. Bennett.
Did we get public comment on this one?
Mr. McCarter, we generally don't provide public comment on a resolution.
I don't believe that there is room for public comment on a master plan amendment. There is nothing to prevent you from taking public comment as long as it's relevant to the subject matter.
Okay. So we're in the middle of a motion. Did the board want me to refrain to take?
I would withdraw my motion to allow for public comment.
Okay. Then we will allow public comment, but it must pertain to the direct resolution.
Hi, my name is Eric Hobbs. I'm at 340 Whitney Bay, so I am property that directly backs up to 257. This one, I was just looking through and trying to get some idea, you know, when we look at that heavy industrial, I guess kind of a two-part thing. You know, we said it's kind of a campus environment. I've had it where, you know, we see the existing oil and gas operations, where that one was actively drilling, I could actually feel it in my floors. And I just question, you know, with heavy industrial, that close to residential, just kind of what the greater scope of that is. I think the other part of it is where we said that there was public comment 2 years ago. I talked to neighbors on both sides of me, and one had got the letter and wasn't able to come. The other one had never seen anything at all about this. And so I just thought, well, at least, you know, give it a chance for more public opinion, especially where those people, especially on Whitney Bay, are going to be impacted by this, or potentially impacted by this.
Thank you. Any additional questions? If not, we do have Mr.
I guess
Baker.
to clarify, the previous residential mixed use was much larger. Now we're just condensing it on 257. Okay.
That's a fair assessment, yeah.
So where previously that entire residential mixed use was west of heavy industrial, the old Kodak campus.
I believe there was some industrial between Kodak and residential mixed use.
Wasn't it like?
And how close or how far away is neighborhood development?
From this proposal?
Mm-hmm. Not from probably the multifamily part, but from what we're proposing for the heavy industrial.
I believe it's at least 1/8 of a mile. The applicant might be able to better answer that.
Okay. Would the applicant mind coming back up? We need you to speak into the microphone just for the sake of those that are listening.
So to give you an idea of scale on the map that's in front of you now, you can see there is a dimension of 2,400 feet that goes from the center line of Highway 257 to an area that's delineated with a dashed line, kind of in the center of the property, if you see that. And then, so if you take half of that distance, that's roughly about where the edge of the industrial would be. And then, as Paul pointed out in his presentation, there is the hatched area that places more restrictions than what the normal industrial district would allow. So the answer to your question is it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,200 to 1,500 feet from Highway 257. So quarter mile, about that, somewhere in there.
Can I ask a question, Madam
Yes, Mr. Raymar.
The gentleman that spoke up was referencing a previous time that this, what's he referring to? That's, what was that time frame? Was that the 2006? Was that, what's he referring to when he's talking about it? Or it came up recently
meeting.
or, was it the neighborhood meeting or?
Yeah, I think he's referring to the neighborhood meeting that was held in December of 15.
Oh, December of 15, okay.
But this is not a rezoning request.
This particular item, if I may, this particular item is an amended master plan request.
Right.
The next item on the agenda would be the PUD zoning.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay. Is there a motion?
I would move to approve the resolution as presented.
And a second?
Second?
We have a motion on the floor for Ms. Sharman and a second for Mr. Bennett approving resolution number 2017-95. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to item 8, a public hearing for ordinance number 2017-1549, an ordinance pursuant to Chapter 16, Article 23 of the Windsor Municipal Code, approving the Great Western Second Annexation Planned Unit Development within the town of Windsor. Robert Eck Brackbrough Land Acquisitions 2, LLC, the applicant, Josh Rowland, LAI Design Group, the applicant's representative. This is quasi-judicial. Mr. Hornbeck will provide the presentation, and I would seek a motion to open public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I move to open public hearing.
Second?
Motion on the floor for Mr. Rennemeyer and a second for Mr. Bennett to open public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And public hearing is now open. Mr. Hornbeck.
Madam Mayor? For
Yes.
the record, I'd like to point out that in my capacity as Town Board Liaison to the Planning Commission, I was present at the Planning Commission meeting during which this matter was previously presented. I wish to state that my participation in the Planning Commission proceedings has in no way influenced me in my capacity as a Town Board member this evening. I will make my decision and cast my vote this evening based solely on the evidence presented during this public hearing.
Okay. Mr. Hornbeck, please proceed.
Thank you. This proposed planned unit development, or PUD overlay, has been reviewed in accordance with Article 23, Chapter 16, which states that the PUD regulations, the intent of the PUD regulations is, among other things, to, quote, provide flexibility in land planning and development, resulting in amenable relationships between buildings and ancillary uses, and permitting more intensive land use of land where well-related open space and recreational facilities are integrated into the overall design. Again, this is the same site as the previous agenda item, east of State Highway 257. Existing zoning is residential mixed use, as well as general commercial and limited industrial. The PUD plat document is similar to the master plan, where it breaks areas down by use in PUD area 1 through 9. The subject rezoning application would create a PUD overlay district, which constitutes an amendment to the town's official zoning district map, and the minimum standards approved with the PUD will be applied to future land use applications within the PUD district. This PUD proposes variations to allowed uses, and the variations proposed to the uses center largely around the flexibility the applicant is seeking in either general commercial or multifamily on PUD Site 3, as well as the option for either limited industrial or general commercial on PUD Site 4, I believe 2 as well. The proposed would also modify the building heights, so it would actually allow for taller building heights in this dashed area towards the interior of the site, and reduced building heights in this other dashed area. We would also place more extensive limitations on outdoor storage in this buffer area. And finally, it would apply the commercial corridor plan to an area that's otherwise not subject to that plan. So all of the uses fronting on 257 and on Eastman Park Drive would be subject to that in those design standards. The purpose of these changes is to provide greater flexibility in future development and to create greater compatibility between the heavy industrial uses and the residential uses, as well as the state highway corridor. This is consistent with the intent of the PUD regulations, which are, quote, intended to accomplish the purpose of public control to the same extent as do zoning and other regulations applicable to conventional lot-by-lot development, while simplifying, integrating, and coordinating land development controls and providing necessary flexibility to encourage design innovation and creative community development, end quote. Included among the PUD objectives that are intended to further are to encourage unity and diversity in land development, resulting in convenient and harmonious groupings of uses, structures, and common facilities, varied type, design, and layout of housing and other buildings, and appropriate relationships of open spaces to intended uses and structures. Based upon the application materials, this PUD appears to further this objective. There was a neighborhood meeting held in December of 2015, and there were 3 neighbors in attendance. The proposal is in conformance with the comprehensive plan, particularly Chapter 5B growth framework, as well as the objective 1. Staff analysis on those items. The proposed PUD maintains the community character by buffering heavy industrial uses with limited industrial and or general commercial uses, and by applying the design standards of the commercial corridor. So again, that's really the PUD area 1, 3, 8, and 9. All those areas are proposed to serve as a buffer between existing homes to the west of 257 and the proposed heavier industrial uses. And Chapter 5C, Residential Areas Framework Plan, the goal and objective 4. The staff analysis is the proposed PUD depicts 37 acres of potential multifamily housing, which is a housing type identified as an area of need for Windsor. The proposal is also consistent with the strategic plan, particularly the prosperous local economy and safe, well-planned community with spirit pride items. The notice for the neighborhood meeting as well as the public hearings were done in accordance with the municipal code to the property owners shown on the map before you. At their October 18th meeting, the Planning Commission forwarded to Town Board a recommendation of approval of the PUD, subject to all outstanding Planning Commission and staff comments being addressed. Staff requests the following be entered into the record: the application and supplemental materials, staff memo and supporting documents, all testimony received, and the recommendation. And that's all I have on this item.
Okay. Are there any questions before I open up to public comment? Ms. Shawman.
With the notification, was that process only required when the initial PUD was created and it's not required for a change to it? Or can you kind of clarify why that happened so long ago?
So the neighborhood meeting, a neighborhood meeting occurs up front, typically when an application is received. So the application was received in 2015, so they scheduled the neighborhood meeting. I think the applicants and staff had every intention of it moving faster than it did, but there were a number of back and forth items that took some time to reach agreement on. So it is a larger window than is often seen between that neighborhood meeting and this hearing. In addition to that notification for the neighborhood meeting, there was notification for this public hearing tonight, as well as the Planning Commission public hearing, mailed to those same property owners.
Okay, so these same changes are what was discussed at that neighborhood meeting 2 years ago?
The general and
General scope, anyway?
correct.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Mr. Hornbeck?
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Baker.
How is this more restrictive or better than just rezoning, a normal rezoning? I'm thinking all that residential mixed use is now going to be industrial. So what's the difference between a PUD and just a rezone?
They could have sought straight zoning with, they could have asked for heavy industrial, maybe up to about this line. I think their intent was to provide kind of a transition where it's somewhere between the heavy and limited industrial uses. So there are some advantages to the PUD versus a straight zoning.
But they could have done that with a straight zoning. They could have pushed the heavy industrial further east.
They could have, yes.
Could it have gone further west? I'm just thinking the previous was all RMU. They couldn't have put heavy industrial there.
This is a request that we've had. Where that line falls, I think has been considered at the applicant's request.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, did you have another question, Ms. Sharma?
Do we have a standard for the proximity between residential and heavy industrial?
There is no specific dimensional requirement. I do want to add, to the comment of vibrations and things, there are performance standards that go along with industrial uses. Something like a vibrating from a manufacturing plant that has vibrations or odors, things like that would be prohibited from any industrial use.
Okay. Any additional questions? Well, we do have best management practices in place. Would those relate to anything in here as well? We have it related to the oil and gas industry specifically, but.
The best management practices pertain specifically to the oil and gas pads, but the standards that Paul was referring to regarding heat and light and vibration and those kind of things are in the actual municipal code. And I guess I just wanted to add a little historical context, just since I sat through the previous rezonings as well. This property was all originally heavy industrial when it was Kodak's property, and so it was prior to the 2008 or 6 master plan amendment. The property was a very contentious rezoning, actually. When it was rezoned from heavy industrial to residential, I know that the school district and the fire district were very adamantly opposed to eliminating that much industrial ground from the tax base. And so it's ironic that now we're kind of going back to what it was before those contentious hearings, but with some more safeguards, as Paul outlined with the PUD. It's kind of misleading looking at this map because it is such a large acreage. A lot of the maps we look at are smaller properties than this, but it is actually over 1,000 feet between those heavy industrial uses and the highway, and then with the railroad on the west side of 257, and then some other trail improvements and things of that nature. It's a very big setback between the two uses. And regarding the question about the separation between heavy industrial and residential, we don't have a separation requirement, but we do have setback requirements in the industrial zoning district that address if we run into a situation where we have those two zoning districts adjacent to one another. I believe it's a 200-foot setback for buildings in the heavy industrial zone. So there are some things in the code, but as Paul pointed out, the PUD is really intended to put additional architectural standards, landscape standards, and safeguards to mitigate any incompatibilities.
Because that's what I was going to ask, because I think it states in here that they intend to design in a manner that is compatible with the surrounding. And that pertains even to in the heavy industrial portion of that?
The heavy industrial portion would not be subject to the
It would not be.
corridor plan, which is intended more for retail. In this case, we would apply it to multifamily type uses as well as the limited industrial.
And maybe this is a question then for the applicant, but is the intentions of this still to be a regional quote-unquote employment center, so to speak, that is in the packet?
Not knowing the exact definition of that, but yes, I mean, the idea is that it's primary employment.
Focused on industrial and commercial uses that is supported by multifamily, residential, and community commercial uses.
Right, so absolutely, primary employment.
Okay, and I know we don't have Ms. Johnson, our economic development person here, but I believe this identifies a gap in our business studies that we've done before. Is that, I mean, I don't know that we have anybody, but I mean, I'm posing that question because I believe that she's identified this as a gap previously. Is that something you could speak to?
Well, I don't want to speak for Ms. Johnson, but yes, it has been identified that way.
Okay.
And candidly, I think as one of the planning commissioners accurately stated, so this has gone full circle now, meaning where it started as industrial, it was zoned residential, now back to industrial. But I do believe that if Stacy were here, she would agree with the following statement, and that is that to expand the potential for industrial in an area where we already have it it's better suited here, and it's actually, I guess, absent elsewhere in the town as far as the future opportunity for it. So, I don't know if I did that right, but that's the gist of it.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions from town board members before I open it up to public comment? This is a public hearing, so is there anybody this evening who wishes to speak to the board on this matter? You come before the board and state your name and address.
Gloria Belden, and I'm very, very aware of the industrial issues, but you said this hasn't been, this is done a while ago, and are these members aware, these people, are they aware of it to this day? And if they aren't, I would like to see them come to the meeting or have it signed, or have them really notified of all the preliminaries of everything that's going on, because the public really does need to know. And I really do want to know what the heavy industrial is all about. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to the board during the public hearing? Okay. If not, Mr. McCarter, we have everything we need for the record at this point in time?
It appears so, Madam Mayor.
I seek a motion then to close public hearing.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor from Ms. Sharman and a second from Mr. Adams to close public hearing. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. Public hearing is closed. Moving on to item 9, ordinance number 2017-1549. An ordinance pursuant to Chapter 16, Article 23 of the Windsor Municipal Code approving the Great Western Second Annexation Planned Unit Development within the Town of Windsor. Robert Eck, Roland Acquisitions 2, LLC, the applicant. Josh Roland, LAI Design Group, the applicant's representative. This is first reading and quasi-judicial. Mr. Hornbeck, anything further?
Nothing further.
Okay. Town board members, anything further, any other questions?
question. I think
Mr.
I'm stating
Baker.
up. This is first reading. The second reading, there will be public hearing. Right? There will be
Public comment.
Public comment, we
yes,
just
I
took
apologize.
public hearing
So there will be an opportunity for people to come speak.
on the second reading, correct?
And if I can add to that, there's another component to this plan to modify the master plan and the zoning for this area, and that is there is a development agreement that was negotiated many years ago that has undergone serious renegotiation and modification. That development agreement contains vested property rights, as did the prior agreement. And what that means is more notice and more opportunity for the public to be heard on the question of vested property rights. So I think to answer your question, Mr. Baker, there will be another opportunity for the public to be heard, not only public comment on second reading of this ordinance, should it clear first reading tonight, but also another opportunity to speak on the question of the terms of that development agreement, particularly the vested property rights. And I'll explain that when next we meet on that particular matter.
Okay, thank you. Anything further from the board? Okay, if not, we do have a ordinance on the floor, and I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve ordinance number 2017-1549.
Second. Motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer and a second from Ms. Sharman approving ordinance number 2017-1549. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Moving on to item 10, a public hearing for ordinance number 2017-1550, an ordinance of the Town Board of the Town of Windsor, Colorado, approving the amended and restated service plan for the Brands East Metropolitan Districts numbers 1 through 4, formerly known as Eagle Crossing Windsor Metropolitan Districts numbers 1 through 4, and authorizing the execution of an amended and restated intergovernmental agreement between the town and the districts. The Brands Metropolitan Districts, William T. Ankley, White Bear Ankley, applicant's representative. This is legislative action with Mr. McCarter giving presentation and having special counsel presented by Carolyn Steffel.
That's right.
And I would seek a motion to open the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I move that we open public hearing on ordinance number 2017-1550.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer for ordinance 2017-1550. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And public hearing is opened. Mr. McCarter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to set the table a little bit and then allow Ms. Steffel to take the lead on the specifics. But let me tell you that this is a legislative public hearing. It's not quasi-judicial, so the rules are a bit relaxed. The idea is for you to receive information in support of and perhaps opposed to an amendment to the service plan for this metropolitan district. This is an existing Windsor Metropolitan District. As you can see, it used to be called Eagle Crossing, and now it's been renamed the Brands East. And although the existing Metropolitan District Service Plan was approved by you, the developer and the districts have gotten together and have come up with a new plan that takes into account the plans for what you have come to know as the Brands East and, to some extent, the Brands West. This service plan amendment was presented to us several months ago. It has been the subject of much conversation, not only between my office and representatives of the district, but also between Carolyn Steffel and representatives of the districts. And what you have before you then is the best that council can do in terms of the legalities, but there are still a few areas of concern that Carolyn is going to talk with you about and that Mr. Ankley will also speak to this evening. I have spent enough time talking with each of them that I'm confident that they will be able to pinpoint their concerns for you so that you can make informed choices about whether you're prepared to approve the amended service plan as presented, or if you wish to propose or request further modification in some way. So with that, I would ask Carolyn to step forward and explain to you her concerns, and then let's give Mr. Ankley an opportunity to address those as well and see where this takes us. Thanks very much.
Hi.
Thank you, Ian. Madam Mayor, I'm Carolyn Steffel from Moses, Widmeyer, Harrison, and Woodruff, Special Counsel to the Town of Windsor on Special District and Metropolitan District matters. And I have had a chance to review this amended and restated service plan. It is a material modification of the service plan because, as Ian mentioned, there have been so many changes. The applicants and the districts are requesting an increase in the debt limitation and also adding some new sources of financing to pay for that debt into their financial plan, most notably the sources of revenue that arise out of the business assistance agreement that has already been approved by this town board, specifically the credit PIF and the mandatory PIF. And the developers' attorneys are here and are planning to make a presentation to you on what they're proposing in terms of some of those changes. I have reviewed the amended and restated service plan in accordance with the town code and also the Special District Act. As you know, the town code is a guide for special districts in terms of the provisions applicable to special districts, and the town board has the ultimate authority to make a determination as to the terms and conditions for approval of the service plan. But there are some ways in which this amended and restated service plan does deviate from your town code, so I wanted to bring those to your attention so that the board can see whether there is sufficient justification in your mind for those deviations. So the first one is actually not a deviation from a town code, but it's something I did want to bring to your attention, which is the debt limitation. So in the original service plan, there was a debt limitation of $15 million, and the applicants have requested to increase it to $73 million, which is a very substantial increase. One of the things that the board has to make in terms of a finding to approve a service plan or a service plan amendment is that the districts will have the ability to discharge the proposed indebtedness on a reasonable basis. So you are looking at that debt limitation. Originally, the districts had asked for a debt limitation of $95 million, and in part of the discussions back and forth, they did lower it down to $73 million, which is the proposal before you today. The Special District Act does not require a debt limitation, but the town code does contemplate that there'll be a limited debt cap on how much debt can be issued in total by the special districts. The projected costs of the public improvements under this amended service plan are about $56 million, and that includes approximately $20 million to fund a gondola system. Now, in talking to the districts and their attorney, $20 million is the estimate for the full cost of the gondola system, and they expect that those costs will actually be shared with the Brands West and the Brands Metropolitan Districts. So we don't know for sure what portion is going to be funded by the 4 special districts that are that have the service plan within Windsor, the Brands East that we're discussing today, Brands East 1 through 4. But a portion will be covered by those other districts. So there is a little cushion even in coming up with the number of $56 million because those costs are going to be split with the other districts. In addition, they did put in a contingency for the other improvements of 20%. So the question for the board is you can, as your final action, approve, disapprove, or conditionally approve a service plan. And so the policy decision is, are you comfortable with a debt limitation of the proposed $73 million given the proposed public improvements? And the developer's attorneys can talk to the reasons why they felt that that amount of contingency cushion was necessary for this project and to allow flexibility for changes in cost of financing and the public improvements themselves. Because that's just given that's a large contingency above what the proposed public improvements are, which have a contingency in there. The next item I wanted to bring to your attention is a debt term limitation. Under the town code and the model service plan, there is generally a debt imposition term limit of 30 years. Where the district will provide in their service plan that they will not impose a mill levy to pay for capital improvements that will run more than 30 years. That limitation is not included in the service plan before you. The original service plan you approved in 2014 had a reference to the debt imposition term, but wasn't clear about whether that was 30 years or whether there was an imposition term. So under this existing service plan, what the requirements are is that the term of a debt cannot exceed 30 years. But they could issue multiple debts or multiple refinancing, so it could run more than 30 years. The service plan also says that debt will not be issued after 2038. So the debt is going to end by 2068, but it could be substantially more than 30 years that these properties are subject to taxes. In talking with the districts, they feel that an exception is justified in this case because the districts will primarily serve commercial development. There will also be multifamily residential in there. But their concern was their viewpoint was that having a longer debt term will not be as much of a burden because the owners will be more sophisticated and will be more commercial owners. If you look at the financial plan that they've submitted with their service plan, it assumes about 33 years of debt. So it doesn't assume the whole 50 years of debt. But that's just something, again, for the board to consider if you want to put a condition on approval of the service plan, if you did want to require that debt imposition term. The third difference is that under the town code contemplates that primarily special districts will be funded by mill levies in terms of their capital improvements. And also they can have a public improvement fee that's limited. This district is different because the major source of financing is from that business assistance agreement. In this case, I think that is a justified deviation because this town board has already approved that business assistance agreement. So under the business assistance agreement, there are two sources of revenue, the credit PIF and the mandatory PIF. What the districts are proposing is entering into an agreement with the developer that the developer will collect those fees and share them with the special district, and they will then transfer them to the metropolitan districts and they will be used to repay the debt. So if you look at the financial plan, it has the sources of revenue as both the mill levy taxes and also capital improvement fee and also this credit and mandatory PIF. There is a debt limitation. Now looking at those two pieces, the debt limitation is 39 mills, but they're only expecting in the financial plan to issue 30 mills of debt. And they have an absorption schedule with 3 proposed phases of development that have been used in projecting the amount of mill levy that is going to be produced to repay that debt. And the developer can speak to those assumptions specifically. In terms of the second source of revenue from the mandatory and credit PIF, I did participate in a telephone conference with their financial advisors and the district's attorneys, and they explained to me how they came up with those numbers. They looked at their projections of what the types of development were going to be, what the square footage was going to be, and what average sales would be for those square footages, and then they took 75% of those averages to come up with the revenue stream that they projected for the financial plan. And I think the developers will walk you through how they develop those. So I'm just bringing you through those issues because of the finding you need to make that they have the ability to discharge the debt. So this service plan is different because it's not financed just on mill levies, which is a little easier analysis, but the developers and the districts have provided the basis for those financial assumptions that went into that financial plan, and it does show that they would generate enough revenue to repay the estimated debt that they're projecting. And those are all of my comments. And
so it does show that it has the ability to repay?
It does. Mm-hmm.
And what's that debt allotment, that 56 or the 73?
They are projecting that they will generate enough revenue to even repay the 73. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Mr. Baker.
I have a question about the gondola. Is there any legal definition of a public improvement? That's considered a public improvement?
Yes, one of the permitted uses of a special district is for transportation power, so this would fit under that classification of a transportation power.
What are some other transportation powers?
Well, I think you could do a light rail system, you could do roads, but there is also street powers and traffic control are separate, but busing, light rail, gondolas,
so
maybe even bike trails.
A metro district could create a public transportation system within their metro district.
Yes.
As a public improvement.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, this is for my clarification. The PIP, the preliminary infrastructure plan, 55.7, they're requesting 73, but the 55 includes the gondola.
Yes.
What's the difference, what's the $18 million, is that contingency?
That is all contingency, that's correct.
And who would make the decision about if, well, let's go to the next step, 30 years versus 50 years on debt limit?
Okay.
What I heard you say was that they could extend the debt limit. Who would make that decision?
Well, it would be the Metropolitan District. So this issue is before the town board and you have jurisdiction over it because they're requesting a material modification of their service plan. Once this material modification is approved, the Metro districts would have the ability to issue up to the total debt cap without having to come back to you for reapproval. And so it would be the Metropolitan District Board of Directors that would make the decision on how much debt to issue. They would not have to come back before you. The same thing with how many years to impose a mill levy. They would have to each year certify a mill levy. They're required to have a public hearing, but they would each year certify mill levy. So if they went past the 30 years, they would each year continue to certify that mill levy. And what I expect would happen is they would issue phased debts. They may issue one debt in 2020, another debt in 2030, and that's how they would get past the 30 years, is if they had multiple debt issuances.
And this project may include multifamily?
Yes,
So
it is planning to.
They plan to have residents.
That's correct.
Those residents be renters, leasers, or owners?
According to what I have been told by the districts, they are expecting them to be renters, not owner occupied. And that's how they kind of got to classify this as more commercial, because the thought was they wouldn't be owner occupied, but they would definitely have renters, so they will have residents.
Mr. Baker.
To follow up on that question, if we authorize up to 73 million, there's some sort of market mechanism to keep that in check. They can't bond up to 73 million unless they prove to a bonding entity that they can repay it, correct?
Right, so there'd have to be two items. One, they would have to have enough public improvements to finance with them, because the sources of the bonds will be limited to use for capital public improvements within that are proposed by the district. The second check would be on the bonds themselves. The bond market, you can either do public placement or private placement. If you do public placement, you do go out and you make a number of disclosures, and you have to prove to the bond market that you have the ability to repay the debt. So for instance, I would expect they would have an agreement with the developer before they went out to issue bonds that would talk about the source of the PIF and the credit and mandatory PIF. Now, I would encourage you to ask the developer's representative and the district's representative about whether their financial plan would support the full 73 million and how that would work, because they can speak better to whether they are projecting to have enough revenue to issue up to the 73 million.
And then to follow up on his other question about the 30 years, each debt would probably be capped at 30 years, correct? It would just extend out in totality.
Yes, that's clear in the service plan that the term of the debt is capped at 30 years. Now, if you refinance, you could do another 30 years, but it is capped. Each debt is capped at 30 years.
And how is that different than our service plan? They can't refinance, or what?
Right, so under the town code and the service plan, they can only impose taxes for 30 years. So after 30 years, they have to have repaid that debt or come back to you to request that additional approval to continue to have that debt. So under the town code, what you anticipate is that you don't issue more debt than what you expect you can finance in that 30 years.
And they're going to use the sales tax and PIF as part of the repayment?
Yes, so actually, the total amount that is expected to be generated by just the mill levy would not be enough to repay what they're anticipating. If my numbers are correct, I think that they would generate about 46 million from the property tax piece of it at that 30 mil level, as opposed to they are expecting to issue more than that.
And this service plan doesn't call for an extension of the mill levy to pay that debt?
They extend the amount of years that they can issue debt from 2034, and now the 2014 agreement said that the last date they could issue debt was 2034. This amendment says the last date they can issue debt is 2038, so it does extend the debt 4 years. It does not increase the amount of mill levy they can secure. Under the 2004 service plan, they could levy up to 39 mills, and under this amendment, they can levy up to 39 mills.
But can they collect it longer than 30 years?
Yes.
So they're going to they'll extend the mill levy to the same term as their debt.
I thought the mill was gonna be at 30,
Yeah, that's it too.
and you're talking 39.
Right. So the mill levy cap in the proposed service plan is 39 mills.
Okay.
But the districts are telling us they don't intend to issue more than 30 mills. And the
But they
financial
could.
plan is based on 30 mills.
But they could over time.
But they could. Yes, under the service plan presented, if you approve it, they can issue up to 39 mills. And there's nothing in here that says they could not issue up to 39 mills, or they'd have to come back to you. In terms of the length of which they can issue the mill levy, there was not a clear limitation in 2014 either. And the only limitation in here is that each individual issuance cannot be more than 30 years in term.
So this could go in for forever.
I think 50 years is really the longest it could be, because there is a provision that says they can't issue debt after 2038. So if you look at that, based on they cannot issue debt for more than 30 years, the very longest they could be issuing debt is 2068.
Can
And their financial
can they
plan-
issue it in the year of 2068, or it has to be completed by 2068?
It would be completed by 2068. 2038 is the last day under the service plan that they could issue that debt. And I think the reason that they give themselves that time is because they don't know how the phasing of the development's going to go. But yeah.
Mr. McCarter, at the introduction, you stated we would have a presentation from Mr. Ankley as well.
Mr. Ankley and Mr. Lowenstein are both here.
Okay.
I'm not sure who's going first, but
Do we want
we'll let
to
them
have
sort that out.
Any of that come before us before
yes.
we give other
Oh, yes.
additional, open it to public comment?
Okay. Do you have any more questions for me?
Any other
before I turn it
questions
over?
for Ms. Steffel?
Is there anything in the agreement that specifies that the multifamily is rental versus owner occupied, or is that up to the developer's discretion?
Right. I would like the developer speak as to whether there are any land use limitations on that, but in terms of the service plan, no, there are no such limitations in the service plan for the special districts.
I guess I have a thought. But shouldn't we make the assumption on the existing property, which does not include any residential?
The existing zoning of the property, you
the
mean?
existing zoning.
Okay.
There's been no approval of any residential, correct?
That's where we are. That's right. So the item that was continued earlier tonight would have changed the zoning in this area to multifamily. So you're correct. There's an assumption that at some point in the future, the developer will receive approval to build multifamily residential somewhere in this area.
And we're assuming that is rental.
It's been represented to us that it's rental.
Now, once you approve this service plan, if they change their development plans, the service plan would not come back to you for reapproval. Instead, it would be the land use or the zoning that will come back to you for approval.
Okay.
Oh, and one more thing I will add in terms of that, when you're kind of talking about how you balance these, the town code does specifically talk about how you should be balancing these interests. And it says when you're looking at a financial limitation, you're balancing providing adequate project control and revenue to the project developer to facilitate the desirable development, which will result in demonstrated public benefit, and that's balanced against providing adequate safeguards for protection of residents and taxpayers. So that's the policy consideration that's laid out in the town code.
It's just my education about metro districts. This is different than a residential metro district. This is a commercial metro district.
The Special District Act does not differentiate between the two?
Right, it doesn't, but in practice, it is. Does it?
Not necessarily, no. You can certainly have a metro district or a special district that has both residential and commercial together, and it happens frequently. Less often probably in the developer districts, because I think some of the districts like to differentiate the two in case they want different property taxes or anything like that, or differentiate between them. But there's absolutely nothing that prevents you combining them into a single district, and there would be nothing after this approval that would say it couldn't be residential if the land use changed.
What I'm working toward is an understanding of governance. If it's residential, we would expect at some point there would be residents on the board. In this case, you know, suppose there was a supermarket there. I mean, who would actually be on the board that would make the decisions about extending the debt, increasing or extending debt?
Okay, so the directors can be any property owners within the district. So in that case, if they're commercial property owners, they're not individual property owners, okay? Or it could be anyone who resides in the district. So if you have renters that reside in the district, they are qualified to run for the board of directors, and they are just as eligible as owner-owned residents. So yes, at some point I would expect you would have residents on the boards. There's a kind of control district, there's an operating district, and that will make some of those determinations about bond issuance. And so I would expect that initially the board is composed of representatives of the current owners and developers of the district, and the district can speak to who the current board is composed of.
So a commercial business might be leasing the space from the property owner, who could be the developer or somebody else. But they would not necessarily have any say in extending debt or increasing debt.
Okay, so if it were a commercial property owner, that commercial property owner is not qualified to run for the board of directors because it only applies to owners that own property in their individual capacity.
Okay.
Now, if there are no residents, then the commercial owners can qualify individuals to be directors. And that's what happens when the district is originally organized, because there are no residents. Right. So that's why you have your initial board of directors. But once there's residents, in order for a corporation to qualify more people, they would first have to put out a call for nominations and have no residents be interested. And at that point, they could qualify additional people to run for the board.
Ms. Sherman?
So in theory, is it possible to insert something into the agreement that would stipulate a modification if the multifamily area is eventually approved and instead of being a leasing situation became owner occupied?
It would be. So you can conditionally approve a service plan, and so if there's a change you would like to see in a service plan, you could propose that at this point and make that a part of your approval in the ordinance. And what that proposal would look like would say, you know, in the event that there are owner-occupied residents within the district, then X additional limitation would apply. Now, at that point, they may have, you know, if they've already issued the debt, there's not a lot of remedies available because they need to repay the debt. But there could be a limitation on issuing new debt, you know, up over a certain limit without coming back to the town board. So the way it could read is, you know, if you have owner-occupied residents, and they want to issue an additional amount of debt, then that would be deemed a material modification that would need town board approval, something to that effect. Yeah. Now, I'll also point out that there's 4 districts. So there may be residents in one of the 4, but not all of the 4, so that's something to consider. And the operating district will probably not have residents in it. That is not expected to have residents. So the district that would be making most of the determination about bonds is not expected to have residents. But we could draft something and we could propose something if that was the direction that the town board was interested in going.
Any other questions before we hear from one of the other parties? Okay, who wants to go first? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bill Ankley with White Bear, Ankley, Tanaka, and Waldron. And we specialize in the organization and ongoing representation of special districts in Colorado. I've been in the practice for 35 years, and hopefully we've put a proposal in front of you tonight that will receive your blessing. I do want to say, just as a point of departure, that we have PowerPoint presentations. Stuart Lowenstein with the developer has one that's ready to prepare or to take you through. And then I have one as well on the district-specific items. And we also have Jonathan Hero from Piper Jaffray, who was the person who prepared the financing plan and can answer questions about the financing questions and concerns you might have. I just wanted to make a couple of remarks on the heels of Carolyn's remarks, so that we're focused on that, and then we can take you back through the regular presentation and fold in those elements as we do so. As was pointed out, we already have the metro districts organized. They've been in existence since 2014. The only significant change that we're making to that which the town board has already approved is to update the numbers. We had a project back in 2014 that was nothing like the Brands East, and all of the cost estimates were based upon a much smaller scale development. And so the primary driver for this is that we don't have enough debt capacity in the existing approved service plan to get the job done for the Brands East, as well as to implement the terms of the business assistance agreement that was foundational for the project where it sits today. So again, the numbers changed, so the construction cost estimates changed. The debt cap accordingly changed, and I'll speak to that a little bit more based on Carolyn's comments. And then the financing plan changed. Obviously, the drawings of the improvements are all part of that as well. But the language of the service plan and the things that the service plan allowed us to do we're not proposing significant changes. There have been changes to your town code in the interim, and so we're not completely in alignment with your town code the way it is today, but we have a service plan that was already approved by the board, and we're not asking for any material changes in terms of the actual limits and powers within that service plan. As far as a couple of the points that Carolyn made on the debt cap, so we have $56 million in costs now, which is based on our current engineering. We did originally have a $95 million debt cap in the service plan, and Carolyn and Ian suggested we might want to bring that down a little bit, which we did. I would like to point out, though, that you'll see in my presentation, and Jonathan can address this as well, that the financing plan shows a total of $63 million in proposed bond issuances to fund that level of capital expenditures based on our current estimating today. So that's about a $10 million difference between the total projected bond issuance and the debt cap, which is only about 15% cushion. Typically, we like to see about 30. We always ask for 30, 33%. Windsor has been a little more conservative in that regard. I would suggest to you that 15% is not unreasonable in the circumstance, given the length of time that the project will develop over, and factors may come into play that make it necessary to utilize that capacity. As far as the term of the bonds, again, the language in the original service plan we were prepared to interpret as allowing 30 years for each bond issue when you issued it, as opposed to starting the clock today and having 30 years to get it all done. I think that to have a clock that starts today and then starts to run really creates a dynamic that may not be in the best interest of the taxpayers out there, because you know that you have a clock ticking, you know you have to get your debt issued, and it may cause you to try to accelerate that debt in advance of the time that it might be appropriate to do so. So we've always felt that if we have a limit in terms of how many years you have in which to issue the debt, which has been 20 years in the original service plan, and 20 years based on 2018, we have to get it done within that 20-year period. And whatever the decisions are, the economic decisions that are made at that point in time are going to be based on what the market allows and what the needs of the project are. And when you take into account the fact that you've got a 39 mil cap in the service plan, there's only so much debt that you can issue at any given point in time, depending on the assessed value that exists at that time. So you've got a governor built in to your service plan that will regulate the amount of debt that you can issue just by virtue of that mill levy cap. So it's a very important feature and a very important point to keep in mind. As far as the use of the PIF, that's per the business assistance agreement. It's a material driver for the financing plan for this project. But the financing plan shows both property tax revenues as well as PIF revenues to support it. As far as the commercial nature of the project and for sale versus rental, there is no for sale commercial for sale residential that is proposed. Those things can change, and if we need to talk about some sort of manner in which to deal with that, knowing how sensitive a topic that is with the town, then I think we can figure out a way to do that. So those are my opening remarks. I'd like to invite Stuart up to take you through his PowerPoint, and then I'll join you in a little bit with mine.
Good evening.
Can you just state your name and address? I know he
Sure.
said your name, but...
Stuart Lowenstein, 1625 Pelican Lakes.
Okay.
I'm just trying to find that. Scott, do you know if we I don't know if we were supposed to. I have a copy, so it's no big deal if we don't. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we're supposed to be in. Should be coming. Sorry, I'm just trying to blow it up. Thanks. Sorry about that. I think is what we wanted to go back is, as we said, the business assistance agreement that we entered into earlier this year really was the tool that allowed us to do what we call the neighborhood center within the brand's development. Ultimately, this is what we're trying to get through the service plan will be the instrument that allow for those infrastructure costs to be put into the project, such as the gondola, the streets, the sewer, all the infrastructure needs for a neighborhood center that will be really key attributes is where we said it's going to be pedestrian friendly. It will be a project where the community wants to go, well streetscaped, park-like setting, and ultimately we want to do is a live, work, and shop/entertainment type of area, all-encompassed type of place, with again a transportation and pedestrian-friendly corridor. Just to give you kind of flavor, again, is because of how the brands and the brands east, we always envision this to be the kind of the neighborhood center anchored by a grocery store, some type of use of that, liquor store, those type of things into the embodiment of the center itself. Here are some of the type of uses we have. Again, restaurants, quick service restaurants, all the way down to some sit-down. We also have limited service hotel. We have a liquor store, and et cetera going on in here. What we tried to do was we went out all across the nation, try to look at what we call best-in-class type of projects, where they try to integrate from having a lifestyle center to a power center and also to a neighborhood center. One of the ones we went to was up in Farmington, Utah, just north of Salt Lake City, which had all this. It has the neighborhood center. This is a grocery store. It had the plaza across the street, and this one actually uniquely had was just to the east of this project was the county facility. Very similar to what we have, versus the east, we have the north side is the county facility. Again, another one we looked at was up in Portland, Oregon. Again, they integrated hospitality to the neighborhood center and then also have a lifestyle center as well. We also went to the ones in Los Angeles where they had lots again, a community orientated system, and then across the street, a neighborhood feel to it as well. Again, another one down in Austin, Texas, and one in Atlanta, Georgia. Ultimately, I think we talked about the gondola, and we look at this as the intermodal transportation, bringing the people from the east side to the Brands all the way to the west, and potentially going up into the facilities up at the county facility to make sure that people can easily access, put their car in one place, go to a restaurant either on the Brands east side or the Brands west side, go to a movie and vice versa, so they can just park, be at one place, and use that pedestrian or intermodal transportation. This is the grand scheme of things. I think we talked about, again, the neighborhood center being on the east side, Brands East, the lifestyle center, and the power center off to the west side. This is our site plan as we speak today. And anything that's in pink, and I think you guys are going to be also discussing the Brands liquor store, that's right down here. We have another site for another quick service restaurant, and et cetera. We are in the midst, the hotel is being built as we speak, and we have a couple other users that going through planning as well. And then this was the thing that we continued earlier regarding the apartments, as we spoke about. So that's kind of how we envisioned the Brands to the conceptual plan of the Brands. Again, the Brands, the lifestyle center, and we again try to integrate the gondola system. Brands West, ultimately I think is just a kind of rehash for the business assistance agreement. Ultimately was, this is the tool that allows us to go out and get tenants to build out the infrastructure, to have the intermodal thing, and to kind of refresh your things is ultimately is, if it was a tenant that was greater than 50,000 square feet or 15 million in sales, that we had a 2% credit of the sales tax come back to us. For the junior anchors was 2% for the first 15 years, dropping down to 1.25%. And then we had all the other tenants, non-junior or non-anchor, that fit into the 125 credit. We had the rebate of the permit, building permits, and that was up to $6.60 per square foot. And then we also had the establishment of the mandatory PIF of a 175. And then we also had is that we have the Metro District for 30 mills. And the reason we have that is, again, is try to equalize the real estate taxes from the Brands and the Brands East side, because we have two different jurisdictions, and we didn't want tenants to come and say, listen, my taxes across the street are cheaper, or vice versa. So we try to keep this all equal, and no different than the incentive agreement saying, pick the spot where you want, not go where the greater incentives are or cheaper tax base is. And that's kind of the rationale of what we did here. Why the increase, we think, is we want to build a neighborhood shopping center that's integrated into the Brands thing. Ultimately we think is that in the old use is the industrial expense per acre is probably roughly around $500,000 per acre. Under this thing we think is the average per acre capital expenditures is going to be roughly around 1.8 million per acre. We think that the total build out is going to be roughly around $225 million. This ultimately really ultimately is really increasing the assessed value to the project from roughly around 14 to 17 up to around 40 to 45, and really is taking the significant nominal tax base on industrial and magnifying it for going up into commercial use. I thought as we spent a couple seconds, and Carolyn mentioned is we walked her through kind of the methodology of how we got to two components of the bonds and some of the driving forces. Ultimately is one of the steps is fund the mill levy, the assessed value. How do we get to the assessed value? As we said is we have three phases to the project, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Within that, we have the square footage of how we think this thing is being built out. What we did was we applied what we call commercial standards to how much it would cost to build a core and shell of the building, and those range from roughly around $90 to $145 a square foot. And then on top of that, we have to put tenant finish dollars on top of that. Those were driven to what we got to the individual space improvements was the tenant finish, and then we get to what we call the appraised value. Ultimately, it was the composite of the capital expenditures of the core and shell of the building plus the TIs, and then we took a factor of 85% and for the core and shell and 60% for the tenant improvements, because some of that is soft costs, commissions and stuff like that. And that's how we came up with the appraised value, and ultimately then we used the assessed value base, and that's roughly around 70 over 240 is then you get to the assessed value. And ultimately that's what was driven into the bonding model for each phase to come up with the capacity of how much we can have. And I'll let, if there's any more detail, we can ask Jonathan to come up. And then the other one we did was the credit PIF and the mandatory PIF. What we did was, again, we did it by phase and the project size, and then we took the square footage times the sales per type of product type. And you will see in here, we have the highest one is a grocery where we have $667 a square foot per year, and dropping down to roughly around 300 and so on, down on a per square foot basis per tenant, type of tenants. And that's how we get to the type of sales total taxable type of revenue that a type of tenant will generate, and we use that into the bonding model. And that was kind of the methodology of how we got to this. And then I think I'll turn it over to Bill so he can talk about it. We can have questions afterwards.
Where do I find my presentation now that you've learned how to drive?
Let's get out of here. Bill, you should. No, that's not.
This one?
She is. Thanks.
Yeah.
Here's the slideshow.
Which one?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. All right, so there are some things here that we've already talked about, and as we hit them, I'll maybe skip through it a little bit, but here's just the overall current district boundary map laid across the project. As you can see, we have our operating district, district number 1, where the cursor is here. Then we have district number 2, district number 3, and district number 4 with a couple of out parcels that didn't end up and are not in any of the districts as they exist. These are the original boundaries. They haven't changed since 2014. I think we've already talked about the fact that we're amending the service plan to pick up the new development plan and the cost estimates. We've talked about how the business assistance agreement relates to the funding source for this. And Stuart just spent some time on that, so I won't linger on that slide. Again, we're updating the project cost, $56 million, debt cap of $73 million, with revenue streams from the business assistance agreement. it does allow the district, as before, to maintain improvements if they're not accepted by the town or some other governmental entity. Typically, your metro districts are primarily focused on building infrastructure and then turning that over to an existing government that already has the resources to be able to operate and maintain, such as yourselves. But on occasion, there are project amenities that nobody wants to take on the cost to operate and maintain, and so the metro districts typically fill that gap. We do have some changes that were built in from the model service plan. One in particular, requirement to keep any trails which are interconnected with the town open to the public and free of charge for anybody to use. In regard to developer reimbursements, your new policy calls for a vetting process where project costs that a developer might incur directly and then seek reimbursement from the metro district at a later date have to be proven up. And that is in fact a common practice in the industry, to be sure that we have an independent evaluation of any costs that are proposed for reimbursement, and that we have an engineer step in and verify that the improvements are fit for their intended purposes. So we built those additional protections into the service plan. A variety of elements are not changing. We have the ability to do a range of public infrastructure that is authorized for metro districts, classically streets, water, sanitation, parks and recreation, and transportation. Most of the improvements will be dedicated, as I mentioned. Some will be retained. Our mill levy cap is the same as it was before. We do have an obligation in the existing service plan to provide an annual report to the town of any material activities, so that's in there. In the financing plan, which is an exhibit to the service plan, it shows a projected 3 tranches of bond issues, $30 million in 2018, $22 million in 2020, and then an additional amount in 2021 for a total of $55,751,000. The service plan gives us the authority to use basically any legally available revenue that a district can have. So that's property taxes. You've got capital fees that are allowed in your service plan up to $2,500 a unit. You have public improvement fees under the business assistance agreement, or sales tax rebates if it comes back in that form. There's our cost estimates with the types of improvements in there. They're all detailed in exhibits in the service plan. There's a series of statutory findings that the board gets to make, or the council gets to make in connection with your approval, and these are listed here. That there's sufficient existing and projected need for organized service, and the service plan shows that we have 125 acres of commercial and not-for-sale residential that doesn't have a means to generate the kind of dollars that are needed to build the public infrastructure necessary for that project to take flight. The existing service in the area continues to be inadequate. There's nobody else at the table offering to foot the bill for the public infrastructure costs here. We will be building water and sanitation facilities that will be dedicated to existing water and sanitation districts, but they're not in the business of providing the capital infrastructure. The districts are capable of providing economical and sufficient service, and the next one is actually related to it. The area included within the districts has, or will have, the financial ability to discharge the proposed indebtedness on a reasonable basis. And both of these last two items are addressed in the financing plan, because it shows how the revenue streams come about. Stuart has gone through with you the foundation for how those revenue streams come about, and they show the ability to retire the proposed indebtedness within the period shown in the financing plan. Again, I have Jonathan Hero here who can take you through the guts of the financing plan if there are questions specific to that. And so I'm going to pause, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at the moment, or I'll wait until the time is right.
Okay, Mr. Baker.
Yeah, when this business assistance was approved, I seem to recall that it was under the guise of lowering the cost basis for purchasers of commercial properties within the district. Now it appears this money is going to be used for paying back the bonds. Was the old assumption no longer true? Is this conflict, or is it one and the same?
You know, I was not on the ground with the negotiation of that business assistance agreement, so maybe Ian will be able to help me out here. But the revenue streams that come about by virtue of that agreement are called for to be used for public infrastructure costs. And that's the way I think it was originally drafted, and that would come in the form of paying back bonds if that's the means by which the public infrastructure gets built.
Okay.
So, and let me add to that, Mr. Baker, the Brands agreement really had two components. One was that fee waiver side, the credit that was measured at $6.60 a square foot. That went to reduce upfront costs for development, things like the use tax being the very first priority that is offset with that formula. So there were components of the business assistance agreement that went to reducing the cost of development up front. The sales tax rebate that funds what has been presented to you tonight was intended to go to the developer, and then under the terms of the agreement, the developer would then turn to the district and turn that revenue stream over to the districts to allow them to finance public improvements. So Mr. Ankley has characterized it correctly, and so have you. It's both. The business assistance agreement covers both.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. So this is the public hearing portion. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to speak to the board on this agenda item?
Can I ask a question of the bond
Okay.
council?
Mr.
Can I ask
Arnold?
a question of bond council? So in this scenario, this is a unique creation of revenue sources, I think. How does this play on the bond market for the ability to get good ratings and such, because it is a different pot of funds that you normally don't see? And then the other question is, in today's world of the tax bill that's being discussed up in DC, what does that do for any of this, in your opinion, as far as bond capability?
Again, my name is Jonathan Hiru, and I'm with Piper Jaffray, 1200 17th Street, Denver. We're serving as the municipal advisor to the district on this question, or this proposed district. In terms of the business assistance as a revenue source, the first several bond issues that are planned for this district will be non-rated. So because of the amount of leverage that's being applied to the district in terms of the par amount with the assessed valuation in the early years, eventually that evens out, and these bonds might be offered to retail investors. Institutional investors will read very closely the offering document that's associated with these, and in the offering document we'll list the various sources of revenue which have been touched on tonight, primarily the mill levy and the business assistance agreement. And as part of the offering document, there's a risk factors section. And in there, and I'm not an attorney, but having done this for 24 years, there'll be language in there that basically says there's no promise, there's no guarantee that this is going to always continue as projected. So the institutional investors have to take they have to do their due diligence. They have to feel comfortable with the validity of the project, and that goes from who the developer is, what the demographics, what the economics are of where this project is located, and they have to determine if the interest rates being offered justify the risk from their standpoint. Over the last several years, every district has a little nuance that we tend to work with, but some sort of business assistance as a revenue source is not uncommon, and it's been accepted by the institutional marketplace. I think the second question was more in regards to the proposed tax law changes. They're fairly sweeping. They seem to be changing by the hour, depending on whether it's the House or the Senate bill and who you'd like to read about. Metropolitan districts in particular, or what I call general government financing, what's being proposed here tonight would not necessarily be impacted. There is a provision that's been discussed about eliminating the ability to advance refund bond issues. And advance refunding is a refunding or a refinancing that's greater than 90 days from the call date. Every bond issue generally that gets issued has a call date. So if you want to refinance, much like your home, you borrowed here, rates are lower, you can refinance. Under the federal tax code, you can do one advance refunding, meaning it's greater than 90 days. That is on the potential chopping block to be taken away. So trying to look a little bit into the future, we've already started talking to various clients about issuing bonds with a slightly shorter call date. So the impact of taking away an advance refunding is somewhat mitigated. I don't have the ability to tell you if that's going to happen or not, but that's what we're thinking right now.
Thank you. Any additional questions for him? Okay.
My only other question, if I may, and I'm sorry I'm asking this, but does the business assistant agreement term line up with the Metro District term as far as particularly relying upon business assistants? Do they line up, or is it shorter, or is it, how does that work?
BAA stipulates that we have 5 years to incubate the space or the tenancy, but there was an outside sunset date, if I'm doing it off the top of my head, December 31st of 2047, if I remember correctly.
Sounds right.
So if that was ultimately it was the incentive to get us an incentive to get tenants in there as quickly as possible. Right. And once that tenant's in there, we have 25 years. So if we had tenant A today, the clock would start ticking. But ultimately is all the tenants' incentives and that credit PIF would go away in 2047. And that was only for the credit PIF.
So is that generally a yes, they do line up?
Well, if the borrowing is authorized to extend beyond 2047, and that revenue stream dries up in 2047, I assume that Piper Jaffray has done the math to curtail the assumptions that are built into the model as 2047 kicks in. You know how I am with numbers and columns, so I count on people like Jonathan to do that math.
In the numbers that we've run today or recently, we actually showing it going out to 2051. So I guess we'll need to verify that.
But some of that was associated with the mandatory PIF, not the credit PIF.
And that's the variation. To answer Town Council's attorney's question, yeah, we would structure the principal and the interest in those last years to drop off so it kind of matches the reduction in the business assistance revenue flowing in.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, Mr. Arnold?
No, thank you.
Okay. Then we will open it up now to the public segment, if there's anybody who wishes to speak to the board during the public hearing in this segment. Come before the board.
Thank you very much. Gloria Belden. That's a lot of debt and a lot of risk. And I think that we need more research.
Timer.
And it seems like this company is pretty much dictating to the town of Windsor. And I think we need to know a little bit more because this is Windsor, and maybe the town board knows a lot, But to me, it seems like the town attorney, I don't know, I really need you to really help us here. And the water and the gondola, I like Windsor the way it is. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who wishes to come before the board in the public hearing? Okay, any other questions from board members?
I guess my only question would be if the applicant would be, I guess, agreeable to some sort of provision for alterations if there ends up being an owner-occupied residential component. So I guess to me, that's my concern with it, is that this is a very complex metro district system, which seems reasonable for a commercial entity, including rental residential. But my concern is that if you end up with a owner-occupied section, that this all of a sudden is not really a good application to that entity.
Understand, and I'm very confident that we can get some language worked out with your staff to take care of that issue. Very confident.
Okay. Anything else? I would seek a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that we close public hearing.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Bennett and a second from Ms. Showerman to close public hearing. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. Public hearing is closed. Moving on to item 11, ordinance number 2017-1550, an ordinance of the Town Board of the Town of Windsor, Colorado, approving the amended and restated service plan for the Brands East Metropolitan Districts numbers 1 through 4, formerly known as Eagle Crossing, Windsor Metropolitan Districts numbers 1 through 4, and authorizing the execution of an amended and restated intergovernmental agreement between the town and the districts, the Brands Metropolitan Districts, William T. Inkley, White Bear Inkley, applicant's representative. First reading of legislative action. Mr. McCarter.
So you've heard what you need to hear as a legislative matter on whether to approve the service plan amendment here on first reading. And the subject of accommodating owner-occupied residential in that portion of the district that may be ultimately rezoned to accommodate the multifamily. In speaking briefly with the applicant's representative, the suggestion is that the ordinance be approved on first reading as it appears in your packet, with the understanding that on second reading, we bring a modification back that speaks to accountability to residential owner-occupied properties. What that looks like to me tonight is rather fuzzy, but council seems quite confident that we can work that out. And my experience with this group is that we can work it out to increase that level of accountability and bring comfort to those of you who are concerned about that. So my recommendation is that you approve the service plan, the amended service plan as presented, that the ordinance be approved as drafted, but that it is understood that on second reading, it may look somewhat different, and we will highlight for you, just as we always do when we change things between first reading and second reading, so that you can see what we've done on that. If what we do on that score is not satisfactory to you, it fails on second reading, theoretically. But if we can finesse the language, modify the language in a way that's satisfactory, then we'll bring it back on second reading and take it up at that time. That's my recommendation.
Okay. Are there any additional questions this evening? Mr. Bennett?
I'd have a comment. And this may not have owner-occupied residents in the future, but if it does, this is just what I've experienced the last year and a half, and most of our districts work really well, our metro districts. There's a couple, there's some issues, and I'm an advocate for some type of language that requires residents to be on the board and requires elections to be notified. There is a requirement right now that elections have to be publicly notified, but it's very hidden. It's one little notice in the newspaper, and I think there's been some changes in state law. And the other requirement I would suggest is that board meetings be held within the Metro District, or certainly within the town of Windsor. So if there's some way to work all that in there with your magic, that would be great. Okay?
Okay. Anything else? Okay. If not, we do have a ordinance before us, and I would seek a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve ordinance number 2017-1550.
Second?
Second.
Motion on the floor for Mr. Redemeyer and a second for Ms. Sharman approving ordinance number 2017-1550. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Moving on to item 12, a site plan presentation for Eagle Crossing subdivision, second filing, lot 2, block 1. Danny Byerly is the applicant. Patricia Croach, North Star Design, Inc. is the applicant's representative. Mr. Hornbeck is going to give a presentation. Mr. Hornbeck.
Thank you. This site plan has been reviewed in accordance with Article 9, Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code. The site is located on the northeast quadrant of Fairgrounds Avenue and Crossroads Boulevard. The proposed site is zoned general commercial, as shown on the map. The overall development characteristics include a total lot area of 1.8 acres. Approximately 22% of that would be landscaped. Proposed is a 20,000 square foot liquor store building. There are 66 parking spaces proposed. The Planning Commission did approve off-site parking on the adjacent parcel to be provided in the future. The building characteristics include predominantly split-face CMU in earth tone colors, a building height of 27 feet, a flat roof with a covered entry feature, as well as faux window display boards. The site plan with Fairgrounds Avenue on the left side and Stallion Drive to the top with Summit to the north of that. And landscape plan does include street trees along Fairgrounds and landscaping of the parking lot. Building elevations, the top elevation faces east towards the parking lot. These, what appear to be windows, are those faux window display boards I referenced that will have advertising within them but kind of mimic the look of a window. The lower elevation represents the side facing Fairgrounds or the west side, and then the north and south elevations as well. As always, this site plan presentation is intended for your informational purposes. Should you have any comments on the presentation, please refer those to staff at this time. I do want to note the applicant is present, should you have any questions for him. And with that, that's all I have.
Are there any questions, Mr. Baker?
Is there a corridor plan, and I assume this is all compatible?
This is subject to the corridor plan, and we've been working with the applicant from the initial submittal to bring it into conformance, and what you see before you is generally in conformance with that plan.
Because it doesn't seem similar to the Summit or the 7-Eleven, so I want to make sure it fits in over there. I guess it does. Doesn't matter?
I mean, the primary thing it looks at is the materials, so it meets the material standard, as well as breaking up the kind of overall mass with, changes in the roof line, not having blank walls, so having these window display boards. So they do meet the corridor plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Sharman?
Can you go back a couple slides where it showed, yeah, that one. What is that immediately to the south? That isn't a street there, is it?
No, this is the loading dock area, and
Okay.
there'll be a wall there that screens it, as well as some landscaping.
Okay, and then is that an additional lot that's to the south of that?
Correct, there's one additional lot right on the corner.
Okay. And my other question was, will this store feature a drive-through?
There's no drive-through plan.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Any other questions? Is this all brick then?
It's a split face CMU. So it's
Sorry?
a split face concrete masonry units.
Okay.
Similar.
So what does it do? Have like an imprint? I mean, because it looks like a kind of a brick facade in the
Right,
pictures you're seeing here.
they're a little bigger than a brick, but a similar kind of effect.
Is there?
If I may.
Oh, yes. Please come up.
My name's Danny Biley, I'm the applicant. CMU is basically simulated rock. They're in 8-inch squares. We did our basic look. If you've seen REI in Fort Collins, that is CMU block, and that's what we use as our foundation to change. And then we try to make it look a bit more like a, Western saloon with regard to the split level, which was on staff's recommendation. And then our feature on the building is to simulate the mountains of the Rockies. And they will be backlit from on the roof to try and simulate that of an evening. And he mentioned the poster boards. If you've looked at movie theaters with the coming attractions similarities, there'll be 4-foot squares with soft LED lights. We don't really like neons, so it'll be a New Belgium poster or an Odell's poster with the soft white light that surrounds the area, which lights up the building. But the main composite is of the material that he described.
Okay. Are there any additional security features on the outside premises or lighting features?
We've got 36 security cameras inside and outside the building, if that's what you're referring to. So the whole parking lot will be covered, everything inside, full sprinklers. We have actually a sprinkler direct access from the outside for the fire department to be able to go into the building without us present, if need be. A little bit about my background. I'm a former SAS officer in the British military and trained the Navy SEALs, so security is quite of a utmost concern for me. I'm quite qualified in that department.
Okay. Any additional questions? And I will remind my colleagues, this is your one and only time to make comment on this site presentation. Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to item 13, resolution number 2017-96. A resolution initiating annexation proceedings for the Swanson annexation to the town of Windsor, Colorado. John Turner, North Windsor Holdings LLC, the applicant. Kristen Turner, TB Group applicant's representative. Legislative action, Mr. Hornback to give presentation. Mr. Hornback.
This annexation request is to annex 28.9 acres to the town of Windsor as general commercial and residential mixed-use zone districts. The purpose of this annexation is to annex the Harmony Road right-of-way, as well as to assemble adjoining properties as a part of the proposed Rocky Mountain Sports Park. Development of the sports park will require a master plan approval by town board, as well as administrative approval of site qualified commercial industrial site plan. And those will be presented to the town board. In accordance with the Windsor Municipal Code and the Municipal Annexation Act of 1965, this resolution is required in order to initiate annexation proceedings. Additional town board meetings, setting public hearing dates, and conducting the actual public hearings will be required as a part of this annexation. A neighborhood meeting will also be required, which will require notification of property owners within 300 feet. So this is the proposed, what's known as the Swanson property, as well as the portion of right-of-way for Harmony Road. The financial impact, relationship to comprehensive plan and strategic plan will all be looked at in more detail as the annexation is processed and reviewed, should this resolution be approved tonight. Staff does recommend town board approve the resolution initiating annexation proceedings as presented.
Okay, Are there any questions for Mr. Hornbeck? Can you go back to the colored slide? So it says in our packet, a petition to annex approximately 28.9 acres as general commercial and residential mixed use. So what is the red indicating?
The red is current, it's the future land use plan that's adopted. So it's showing this area was envisioned as commercial, the red.
And now it's going to become RMU.
I believe this part would be commercial. The bulk of
the rest of the red there outlined is going to stay general commercial then? And we're just moving this little tiny piece here, RMU?
So the highlighted portion is shown as general commercial in the future land use plan. They're proposing to annex it as general commercial.
Okay.
I believe the strip here is perhaps the one that would be residential mixed use, which is just the right of way.
So everything that we're seeing there in red is going to be, or is slated to be general commercial, and that little piece will move to general commercial if we approve this resolution. Am I following correct, or what am I not following?
The resolution you're being asked to approve tonight just accepts the petition and says on its face it appears complete. Staff will take it from there, and then what happens specifically with zoning and future land use, that'll come in different phases. Yeah, so really this is the initial step that just accepts the petition and gets it started.
Annexation. Okay. Okay. Any additional questions? Mr. Ennemeyer?
The right of way, can you explain that? Why is that included with this? Why is that piece, the roadway?
There's a number of reasons, because the proposed sports park would have obviously substantial traffic impacts, and so Windsor would want to be able to dictate what roadway improvements need to take place in association with that. So the potential for Harmony to be widened, I believe it's being looked at to mirror the Timnath section that they recently widened. The 2-mile section that's in Windsor is one reason, and Weld County has indicated they would not want to continue maintenance of it, since it would be adjacent to Windsor development.
Thank you. That was my question about Weld County.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 2017-96.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Ennemeyer and a second from Mr. Babinet approving resolution number 2017-96. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And it passes unanimously. Moving on to item 14, resolution number 2017-97. A resolution authorizing a one-time contribution to the Great Western Trail Authority for the purpose of completing the Great Western Trail from the town of Severance to the town of Eaton. Legislative action with Mr. Lucas giving presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Tonight before you is a request from the Great Western Trail Authority for a one-time cash match donation of $50,000. They have recently been able to acquire an additional $415,000 CDOT TAP grant, so they're looking for the match, and they've requested the same funding from the town of Severance and Eaton and Windsor. I know that Severance has agreed. I hadn't heard Eaton's status, but I think Mr. Tom Jones from the Trail Authority can answer that question. So this would be a one-time cash match donation in addition to the typical $10,000, which is allotted to the Trail Authority every year. So the request tonight, after Mr. Jones speaks, would be, if you so choose, that would be included in your 2018 budget. So with that being said, I'll let him come up and discuss any additional comments that he wants to make.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric. Tom Jones, 601 Locust Street here in Windsor. I'm current chairman of the Great Western Trail Authority. I think probably Councilman Rennemeyer has been keeping you apprised of our activities on a monthly basis. But this summer we had the opportunity to acquire an additional, we have a $550,000 grant from 2015. And this summer we were offered the opportunity to get another $415,000. These are state funded, or federally funded grants, so they require a cash match. For the $550,000, we need $137,500, and for the latest one, the $415,000, we need another $103,750 or something like that. So anyway, it comes up to around $141,000 we need in match money. The Trail Authority now has in the Treasury, we will have the first of the year $100,000 to put toward this. So that leaves us a deficit of about $141,000. So we've approached the three towns. Severance has agreed to include it in their budget, the $50,000. Eaton has agreed to include it in theirs. So we're asking Windsor to be the final contributor, if you will, of another $50,000. Again, this will be a one-time request. We are uncertain at this time if we can finish the trail entirely with that. We just received an estimate of $1.4 million for construction. We will be able, with this grant, we'll be able to put $1 million toward it, leaving us short around 400,000. We met with CDOT today, and we feel that can be trimmed. Also, we have until July of 2020 to complete the project. But those of us who have been at this, I've been on this board now for 12 years, and there's other members who've been on 10 years or so, we want to get it over with. And if there's any way we can raise the funds in 2018, we want to get going with it. We've established a 501c3, the Great Western Trail Foundation, that will accept tax-deductible donations, and we're going to pursue that. If that doesn't bear enough fruit in 2018, we'll apply for another GOCO grant next fall in October. And I think with this grant and the fact it's shovel-ready, all our engineering and surveying and design is going to be complete by March. And I think if we have to go to GOCO, we're in a pretty favorable position to get more money if we have to. But we're hoping we don't have to. So I'll be glad to answer any of the questions if you have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Jones?
I guess my question's for staff, just to clarify. The memo said it was out of the 2017 budget. So is it?
We'll based upon what Mr. Jones just said, I think we'll recommend it come out of the 18. We'll add this to the 18 budget if you approve it also, like we did with the sidewalk issue we talked about earlier.
Mr. Rennemeyer?
Mr. Jones didn't mention this, but I think it goes, that it needs to be said that Windsor, Severance, and Eaton are all not just contributing financially to this, but are actually all three owners of the trail. They're actually the owners of the trail. So this is actually an investment in our trail system in and around Windsor as a way to also go between those three communities as well. So I just wanted to add that in because he takes pride in it being, as well as, Wade and Parks and Rec and everything, and maintaining the trail for all that get to enjoy it. So.
And I have just two questions. So with the July 2020 completion date, but then you mentioned you're ready, you're pretty much ready to go. What's the timeline for this? Will it take till 2020 to complete it, if you're able to
No,
start?
we're probably looking at construction time of a little over 2 months.
Oh. Okay. And then is our check made then to you? I mean, to the Great Western Trail Authority, and then you'll provide the matching fund you have to provide that up front or at the completion?
As the process goes through, for instance, we have $200,000 or $195,000 in design and engineering costs. And those invoices are trickling in. And Windsor is our sponsor, which means it's the pass-through for these funds. Windsor pays the contractors and then collects from CDOT. And so it's all, the funds have to be available, the match and the CDOT funds have to be in the till, so to speak, together.
And then I just have a comment, and then I think Mr. Adams. I think $50,000 to get almost $1 million towards this project is a fiscally sound and wise investment for our community and our citizens. So I would very much be in favor of passing this resolution this evening. Mr. Adams.
Well, Dr. Jones, I was just going to ask, isn't this trail a nonprofit group as well as the Poudre Trail is?
Well, our foundation is considered a nonprofit. We're considered a governmental agency. That's the way we're listed with the state because of the IGA between the 3 towns. So we're not just a bunch of volunteers out there trying to get money to raise this, to build the trail. It's actually owned by the 3 towns, and we're kind of a branch of the 3-town government.
Okay, I see.
So,
I just wanted to clarify that, and I agree with what the mayor just said too, that 50,000 seems like a small partial down, whatever, for us. It's too late.
It's been a
And
long
I don't know how
time.
you stay awake this long, so.
Okay. So we have this resolution on the floor. Is there a motion?
Well, Madam Mayor, Dr. Jones, the other, Eaton and Severance have already agreed. They've already passed it.
Yes.
They've already.
Well, we have a verbal agreement from them.
Oh, okay.
To include it in their budget. They haven't voted on their final budget yet, but they have told us that they will include it, as long as Windsor goes along.
That's what they said.
Right, that's what all 3 said, that, or the other 2 said that, yeah, we're not going to contribute just the 50, the other 2 towns have to participate.
Right.
Okay. Mr. McCarthy?
And our resolution accommodates that by saying the town manager is authorized to give our contribution as long as the other 2 are in. So I think I think everybody's in the same position of trust.
Okay.
Okay. So is there a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 2017-97.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Rennemeyer and a second from Mr. Adams approving resolution number 2017-97. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And the resolution passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with your project.
Thank you for your work.
Yes. Item 15, resolution number 2017-98. Resolution approving and adopting an amended intergovernmental agreement between the Town of Windsor and the City of Greeley with respect to treated water service. Legislative action, Mr. Wagner giving presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. This item was on your agenda at your last regular meeting for information. It's on your agenda this evening for action. Windsor has a IGA with the City of Greeley for treating some of our water. That was written in 1996 and it runs for 25 years, which means it expires in 2021. There's a provision in the agreement that has to do with the peaking factor of max day usage divided by the average day. And that factor is one of the parameters used in their calculation of water rates each year. Windsor normally tries to keep that peaking factor at around 2.6, but in 2016, we were informed this year that in 2016, that peaking factor went up to 4.3, which meant that could translate to a additional 20% increase in water rates in 2018. So that led us to start talking to Greeley about possible amendments to that agreement and possible extension of the agreement. And so the first thing that we, as I said, started talking to them about was the daily water usage peaking factor and how we could modify that in an amended agreement. And second thing, and they suggested this item was system development charge. Their calculation, I don't know if you want me to go into all the details, but currently if Windsor wants to buy 1 acre foot of additional capacity from Greeley, costs $10,800, which is equal to their existing residential water plant investment fee. They've done some calculations in recent years, and they believe a more accurate number is $19,565 dollars per acre foot. And that's what they proposed to put in the new amended IGA. And then the term of the IGA, as I said, the original one expires in 2021 with automatic 10-year renewals. Proposed amendment would start from this day forward, go another 25 years with automatic renewals of 10 years unless it's terminated by either party. And in order to terminate it, it would either have to be by default of the other party, or the party that wants to terminate it would have to give 10 years notice of termination. So those are the three items in the proposed amendment. The Greeley Water Board discussed the amendments at their October 18th meeting. Their city council ratified the amendment on November 7th, and your Water and Sewer Board considered this item at their October 11th meeting and passed a recommendation of approval for the amendments, and staff concurs with that recommendation.
Any questions for Mr. Wagner, Mr. Baker?
I have a question on the termination piece. Don't we have some shares that can only be treated by Greeley, the GLIC or something?
We don't have them yet, but there is a plan to start accepting Greeley Loveland Irrigation Company, or GLIC, shares, which physically can only be treated at the Greeley Boyd Lake treatment plant.
So if it terminates, how does that work? Will we still be able to keep that piece treated by them?
I think that would have to be worked out.
Or we could sell them.
We could sell them.
Or we could have a different treatment methodology.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Mr. Bennett?
I also had a question about termination. The way I read it, either party can terminate, but they need to give a 10-year notice. Is it possible that both parties could then agree to terminate more rapidly?
I don't know.
Anything's possible when it comes to modifying an agreement. So I think if both parties looked at it and said, we're comfortable walking away on less than 10 years notice, we could probably make that work. Just like with the treatment of the GLIC shares, we could terminate as to all other water sources except GLIC and do that within a shorter window. I think anything's possible, but this gives us the outside parameters, which says if you want to just walk away, you can't walk away without giving 10 years advance notice.
Okay. Then I have one more question. Did I read that Greeley approved number 1, but not 2 and 3? Or did the agreement include both the water usage, the SDC, and the termination?
Yes, they're, the
They approved all three of
amendment
those
includes
pieces.
all three.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? What safeguards have we or are we going to implement to avoid peaking errors in the future?
Well, I think factor in the recent one, 2016, had to do with some, one, Greeley's master meter was reading one figure as far as gallons per minute. Ours was reading another. Our staff trusted ours, I guess, and not theirs, their reading. Turns out that Greeley's master meter was the correct one. So I think it's going to be important for staff to look at those two readings, compare them, and if there's a discrepancy, immediately talk to Greeley staff about the discrepancies and get it resolved as quickly as possible. I
So
think it's-
when you say do the comparison immediately, is this going to happen before the end of the year, before we move into 2018? Is it something we do at the first of the year, or, and then do we do it on a, I mean, is there a reason to have to go back and, you know, relook at it on some kind of regular basis, or once we know, then what, we always just look at Greeley's readings, or what?
Well, those two readings are available on an hourly basis.
Oh, they are,
And
okay.
so, they should be looked at, and on any given day, in my opinion, if there's a discrepancy, we should be calling within 24 hours.
Okay. So daily, this will be looked at?
Right.
Okay.
Is somebody responsible for that?
I'm sorry?
I'm assuming there's a person that's responsible for looking at those readings.
There is, yeah.
Maybe not daily, but
It's
weekly or.
printed out daily, and it's
Okay.
punched and put in a notebook. And so, and it's available at any time on the computer. There's a SCADA system.
How do we know what Greeley's meter says?
We have that information. Our SCADA picks that signal up also.
Oh, okay.
Okay, anything else? Okay, if not, I would seek a motion.
I would move that we approve Resolution 2017-98.
Second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Adams and a second from Mr. Rennemeyer approving resolution number 2017-98. All in favor vote yes, opposed no. And it passes unanimously. Moving on to communications from the town attorney.
I've got one thing that applies both to the town of Windsor and the Kern. Each year, the New Cache Irrigating Ditch Company sends us the opportunity to participate in an off-season leasing program known as the Cornish Plains Reservoir Program. Each time that they've offered that to us, we refer it to Mr. Grasmick and to Mr. Nguyen, our water engineer, to tell us if it makes sense to do it again and to re-up that lease. And we did do that for both the Kern and the town this year. It allows New Cache to negotiate the lease rates, and the revenue that comes in is distributed among all the people who opt in, or all the shareholders who opt into that program. So that's both a Kern option we exercised and a town of Windsor option. I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Kim Emel worked on that for you out of my office. And then this evening we have an executive session that we need to handle. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any further communications from town staff? Mr. Wagner, Mr. Ballstead, Ms. Garcia, Miss Yodeling? Totaling, okay. Okay, sorry.
You
I
guys
know
were
you
close.
pronounce it like yodeling. Okay, hodeling. Mr. Lucas? Miss Emil? Okay. Sorry, I apologize. Communications from town manager, Mr. Arnold.
No further communications.
Okay, communications from town board members. Anything further? Only thing, I just want to remind everybody, Coffee with the Mayor this Saturday at 7:30 to 9, Coffee House 29. Moving on then to item E, executive session.
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4, subsection E, subsection L, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect to the Windsor Mill and elevator property redevelopment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion on the floor and a second. All in favor to move into executive session. All in favor, vote yes. Opposed, no. We will have about a 5-10 minute recess and we will move into executive session.